Chapter 101, Fatal Mistake They Made, 3. Hymera Kuznetsov ran through the forest like her life depended on it, and from what she witnessed, it probably did. When Harry Potter swatted away the killing curse with the weird wandless magic he was using, she knew that they were fucked and she needed to escape as quickly as possible. At that instance, she finally understood why her instincts were screaming at her to run away, and she had learned to trust her instincts long ago, as they had saved her bacon multiple times. That was precisely why she decided to release the poison and hightail out of that place without looking back. Then all of a sudden her instincts flared for the second time tonight, alerting her of the danger. The last time her instincts reacted this way was when Harry Potter tried to ambush them, but this time, something felt different. For whatever reason, her instincts told her to move aside at any cost, so she threw herself to the side, only to see a blue beam pass by her side. I was right. Somehow you can sense the danger. Her eyes were already focused on the figure slowly descending from the sky. To be honest, she didn't know how to feel when she saw that he was completely unscathed by the poison she had released to cover her escape. She wasn't expecting him to die or anything in the first place, but she was at least hoping to buy herself enough time to escape. Alas, here he was, standing right in front of her with an amused grin on his face. Hymera didn't want to die and she would have begged him to spare her, but she didn't believe that he knew how to understand sign language. So, she smiled grimly and took a fighting stance. If she was going down, then she would at least go down with some fight. Usual lethal spells were completely useless against her, as she could heal from practically anything, but she didn't know how she was going to fare against decapitation or the killing curse, though she guessed, not well. Whatever those monsters had done to her, it at least came with a good boon, even though it was kind of insignificant when compared to everything else they had done to her. Hymera could heal from practically anything. Ruptured heart, no problem. Ruptured lung, once again, no problem. Slashed throat, no problem. She could heal from all of that, but no matter how much she tried, she couldn't heal her right arm, which used to be her dominant arm. That wasn't all, she couldn't heal her left eye, left ear, her tongue, or any of the scars she had on her body before she acquired her healing powers. At least, any new scars she received would disappear in a matter of seconds along with the wounds. It was true that she didn't want to die, but at the same time, she also didn't want to get captured. She trembled as a few memories flashed back inside her mind. The way you sacrificed your teammate was pretty ruthless and brutal, which means that you never considered them your teammates. They were allies of convenience, right? The boy asked her, and for a moment, she wondered if she should answer him or not, but she ultimately decided to nod her head in assent. It also means that you don't have anything against me, do you? It was all for the sake of the gold, wasn't it? Harry asked, and once again, after thinking for a bit, she nodded her head in assent. Good, now you see. I am in a dilemma, Harry said smoothly as he stepped forward, making Hymera step back instinctively. She knew that the boy was dangerous as fuck, so she didn't want to drop her guard in front of him even in the slightest. I am not going to lie, you interest me. So, now you have two options in front of you. The first option, you may surrender and we can come to an agreement. If you choose this option, then I am going to pay you for your services. Now, the second option, we dish it out right here, and we will come to an agreement after I beat your ass into the ground. If you choose this option, then you will be working for me, but are not going to get paid. Choose wisely, Harry explained slowly, but he didn't lose the amused grin on his face, and the grin vexed her on so many levels. Hymera snarled at him, but she didn't cast any spells at him. She was a victim of so many terrible things, but she wasn't stupid. Once again, she cursed those monsters inside her mind. Thanks to them, she couldn't even kill herself by taking poison. Her powers would never allow her to die to some measly poison. She had tried, and even cyanide had failed to kill her. If I am going to work for him either way, then I am going to at least get paid, Hymera decided with a scowl as she slowly stowed away her wand. She never liked being unarmed in front of anyone, but sometimes, it was unavoidable. She raised one of her fingers and Harry nodded his head in understanding. She guessed that he probably knew that she couldn't speak. All right, so how about 20 galleons per month and bonuses if you do a good job? Harry suggested, but Hymera immediately shook her head in denial. What he was proposing was impressive, but she wanted to see how much she would be able to get away with. The next moment, she kneeled down and used her finger to draw the figure 50 on the ground, making Harry scoff at her in disbelief. That's too much. 25 galleons and that's it. Harry crossed his arms in front of his chest, but Hymera didn't believe for a moment that she could take him even though it looked like he was unguarded. She once again frantically shook her head in denial, making Harry scowl. "You are driving a hard bargain, woman." Harry scowled, but Hymera stared straight into his eyes resolutely. "Fine. 30 galleons." Harry offered as he threw up his arms in the air in exasperation. Hymera grinned internally in victory. 30 galleons per month was a lot of gold for someone like her, and he even promised her bonuses if she did a good job. It was like her dream job. Hymera finally nodded her head, making Harry inclined his head with a tired look on his face. She wondered what he was going to say now. "I have come to realize that you are mute. Do you know sign language?" Harry asked, and she nodded her head in assent. "Excellent. Now, you may sleep." Harry beamed cheerfully, making her eyes go wide for a second as she saw his hands were covered by a golden glow. The next moment she started to feel drowsy and an inexplicable amount of sleep overcame her. "Motherfucker!" Hymera snarled inside her mind before she finally closed her mind and fell asleep. Harry stared at the sleeping figure in front of him and started to open a portal right under her as he was planning to send her to Jacqueline's backyard. "Do you really think she is that special? She is basically a female Moody, but quite a few levels weaker," Lily complained with a huff. "Yes, but it's a hunch, and if she turns out to be useless then I can always use her as cannon fodder. After all, I never told her what type of services I require of her," Harry explained coldly, making Lily smile proudly at her son. Though that wasn't the real reason he wanted to hire her. She was simply a convenient test subject for him right now. She was missing her right arm, her left eye, her left ear, and probably her tongue too. He wanted to see if he could regrow her limbs and at the same time, fix her scars. He was learning fleshcraft, and he needed a human subject to test his skills. He didn't know if he could build his mom a body using fleshcraft or not, but there was only one way to know. The portal finally formed under the woman, and as soon as she disappeared into the portal, he closed the portal. "What about the others?" Lily asked curiously, but instead of answering, he started to float up in the air. "They will die all the same." "Well, except for one, I guess," Harry answered indifferently as he blasted off toward the direction where the flare was shot up in the sky, but then all of a sudden he stopped mid-air when he noticed something else go up in the sky. "The dark mark," Lily growled in anger when she saw the hated mark floating in the sky. "So, that's the dark mark in action. I have to admit, it didn't look that impressive in the records," Harry mused as he remembered the conjured dark mark he saw in the records of the Ancient One, but once again the spell to conjure the dark mark was redacted from the records, not that Harry cared. Since he knew everything else about the spell, he knew how to cast the spell, and if he really wanted, he could always come up with a new name for the spell. He quickly shook his head and resumed his flight toward where he was heading. He arrived at the site and saw that the last of his targets were staring at the dark mark floating in the sky with dumb looks on their faces. Harry smiled viciously and pointed his wand at one of the men. "Avada Kedavra," Harry muttered, and the green beam left his wand, heading straight toward one of the three last remaining mercenaries. Chapter 102, Fatal Mistake They Made, 4. Hans Muller snapped back to reality when a green spell splashed against one of his companions' back and the said companion slumped down on the ground, completely lifeless. "Colin!" Muller snarled loudly, getting his other companion out of his trance, who was staring at the lifeless form of one of his friends. Meanwhile, Hans quickly turned around to counterattack, but much to his surprise, he didn't find anyone. This was supposed to be an easy mission. Just kill the boy who lived while everyone was busy with the diversion and escape before anyone could realize what was happening. Everything was going according to the plan. In fact, everything was going much better than the plan, especially when the vaunted boy who lived got separated from his family. It made their job so much easier when the boy escaped into the forest. He divided his team into 4 groups so that they could cover more ground and finish the job as quickly as possible, but that was probably when everything went to shit. He didn't even notice that he was already losing his team until he found 2 of his teammates lying in a patch of poison, and there was only one person he knew who used that poison, but there were no signs of either Hymera or the person who attacked them. Which meant that either Hymera escaped or she was probably dead too, and the latter was a much scarier thought. Then someone had to go and conjure the dark mark. Muller wanted nothing to do with the bloody Death Eaters or their dark mark. This wasn't how their mission was supposed to go, but here he was, looking for the person who killed one of his teammates just a few moments ago, and there was a high chance that this person was also responsible for killing the rest of his teammates. "Up here, sucker!" Hans heard someone speak in a mocking tone and started to raise his head. From the voice, it seemed like the person who attacked them was pretty young, probably a teenager, but that should be impossible. After all, he didn't think any teenager would know how to cast the killing curse, but he was shocked beyond belief when his eyes landed on the teenager floating in the air. Why you? You? Hans and Colin started to stutter at the same time as they failed to come up with anything intelligible. How were they supposed to react after realizing that their 14-year-old target was picking them apart? Then how the hell were they supposed to know that the boy who lived wasn't a paragon of light? It was simply unbelievable. You little bastard! I will flay you alive for killing my friend. Colin was the first to snap out of his stumped state, and with a mighty scream, he started to shoot spells at Harry. No, don't! Hans screamed to stop Colin, as he knew that they simply couldn't attack the boy so mindlessly, especially when the boy was clearly flying without any sort of support, but it was too late when the monster wearing the skin of the 14-year-old struck Colin with a mighty lightning bolt, turning Colin into a charred husk. Hans gulped loudly. How was he supposed to win against that? He didn't even notice the boy cast, but Colin was dead. That was proof enough. That was why he called the boy a monster. There was no way a 14-year-old could kill so easily and effortlessly. He stared at the still smoking body of his last companion and gulped loudly. He clutched his wand so tightly that his knuckles started to turn white as the monster disguised as a 14-year-old started to descend. That was rude. My parents were definitely married. Harry muttered, sounding a bit offended as he stared at the still burning husk of the man who called him a bastard. Then his gaze finally focused on the leader of the group. You are way calmer than I was expecting you to be. I was expecting you to attack me in a blind rage. After all, I did kill your whole team. Harry wondered aloud as his feet finally touched the ground. Hans barely held back a growl. Of course, he was angry, but he wasn't stupid. Hans knew that he was good, but even he wasn't that good. Does it make you angry? I killed your whole team. That obviously makes you angry. If it makes you feel any better, then let me tell you, I would have done the same to any other team too. Harry whispered the last part with a grin. You are no light wizard, Hans stated with a growl, making Harry release a roar of laughter. Anyone who believes that I am one of Dumbledore's sycophants are the biggest fools of this era. Harry explained with a shrug. I am not one of his mindless bumbling fools, and that makes me a lot more dangerous, Harry stated as he inclined his head. The Aurors are probably on their way, as someone must have noticed the flare. So, I will be wrapping this up, Harry added nonchalantly, and Hans finally decided to make his move. Avada Kedavra. The man snarled and cast the killing curse at Harry, but Harry easily sidestepped, missing the green death beam as it went past his body. The killing curse was dangerous as fuck, but the spell was completely harmless if it didn't hit you, and dodging the spell was also quite easy as long as you don't freeze up at the sight of the incoming killing curse. Such a nifty spell, wouldn't you agree? Harry asked as he fired a barrage of spells at the man, who was barely able to defend against so many spells. Hans immediately realized that the boy was much faster than him, which wasn't good news from his perspective, as the rate of his survival or revenge was getting dimmer with each passing moment. Stupefy, Conf Ringo, Oxio, Bombarda. Hans completely gave up on silent casting for more power and less concentration, but Harry still batted away the spells with the tip of his wand without barely any effort on his part. Well then, I have played around long enough, and those were the last words Hans heard before his world went completely blank. Harry would have loved to stay and muse for a bit, but he needed to start moving really quickly as the Aurors were probably on the move, especially with the dark mark floating in the sky. Harry started to rotate his hand in the air and a portal started to form under Hans, and when the portal was finally stable, Hans disappeared into the portal. After the man finally disappeared into the portal, Harry closed the portal and started to rise up in the air. He wanted to see if the Death Eaters were still conducting their attack or not. Harry wasn't planning to attack them or kill him, at least, not yet. He knew that he had wasted too much time hunting down the mercenaries, and tangling with the Death Eaters wouldn't be ideal at this moment, as he was trying to lay low for the time being in the first place. Harry stared toward the burning tents in the distance and cleaned his wands for the spells he used. There was no way he was getting caught with 2 killing curses on his wand, just in case someone decided to check his wand. He nodded his head when his wand was finally clean and blasted off toward the burning tents in the distance, but then all of a sudden he came to a sudden halt when he heard some screams. From the screams, he deduced that it was probably someone really young. He looked down only to find Ronald Weasley, Ginevra Weasley, and the Weasley twins at the mercy of a Death Eater. The 3 male Weasleys seemed to be petrified, but that wasn't all, the 3 of them were quite roughed up too. The Death Eater seemed to be bleeding too, which meant that the three of them didn't go down without a fight, but that wasn't what drew Harry's attention. It was the youngest of the family, Ginevra Weasley, who drew his attention. The girl was screaming at the top of her lungs while thrashing around. Harry had never heard anyone scream like that, and she was only a child. Yes, he was only a year older than her, but she didn't grow up like him. She grew up as a child, and that is what she was, just a child. To be honest, he didn't like the Weasleys, but he felt something stir inside of him. The Death Eater scum had his wand pointed at the girl, and he had a very good idea about the spell the man was using. He is using the Cruciatus Curse. Lily scowled in distaste. True, she would have killed the girl very painfully if she had dared to make a move on her Hadrian, but she couldn't bring herself to be happy at the girl's screams, now that she was being held under the Cruciatus Curse by some Death Eater scum. The only good Death Eater is a dead Death Eater, Harry repeated inside his mind, but decided not to kill this Death Eater, especially with the Weasleys present at the scene. They would obviously end up revealing everything to Dumbledore, and for the time being, Harry wanted to keep playing the boy with a hero complex. The screams stopped and the Death Eater finally decided to take a break. Harry slowly lowered himself to the ground, and when he was close enough to the ground, he finally started to hear what the Death Eater was saying. The three of you will die and she will lose her mind? I wonder how Arthur and Molly are going to feel. The man trailed off with a cackle. Chapter 103, The Way He Rolls, I. Harry slowly sneaked through the tree-lines as the Death Eater continued to mock the Weasleys. Harry slowly raised his wand and pointed it at the back of the man and cast a stunning charm. He was sure that he could wipe the floor with the Death Eater, but he didn't want to do that in front of the Weasley children. So, a subtle approach was his only option. Unfortunately for Harry, his plan didn't work out as he expected it to. The man simply moved out of the spell's way like he had eyes on the back of his head. The man whipped around with his wand in his hand and cast Bombarda Maxima. Harry hurriedly erected a shield with a flick of his wand. The spell collided against his shield and disappeared harmlessly. Harry cursed inside his mind when he realized that he couldn't go all out in this fight, and the man he was facing was probably the most competent combative he met tonight. The two of them cast blasting curses at the same time and spells mid-air, creating a mild shockwave. Harry finally walked out of the tree line, as moving in the clearing would be much easier for him. Am I lucky or what? The so-called boy who lived has come to die on his own. The man exclaimed mockingly. So, they failed. I never trusted any mercenaries to get the job done. The man scowled unhappily as he continued to fling deadly spells at Harry. Harry didn't bother to show the man any reaction, as he was busy wondering how to beat the man. Since he couldn't dominate the fight with his unmatched power and speed, he couldn't only beat the man with his wits. He realized that he needed to use some underhanded means to beat the man, but from the looks of it, the man had probably used some sort of ritual to gain some sort of danger sense, or there was no way he could have dodged the stunning charm he cast. Harry flicked his wand over his head, creating a flame whip, and the Death Eater raised a shield for the first time during the fight. Unlike the other mercenaries, the man he was facing right now clearly had combat experience, but sometimes experience simply wasn't enough. The flame whip clashed against the shield, releasing a loud hissing noise. Harry used this chance to point his wand at the ground in front of the Death Eater and cast a quicksand spell. Gra! The Death Eater also noticed the spell, but Harry was already keeping him busy with his relentless onslaught. The man's feet finally started to sink into the ground. It made him really desperate, and he started to cast extremely dark and deadly spells. Avada Kedavra! Bombarda! Crucio! The Death Eater snarled in rage and desperation. Harry easily ducked down as the killing curse passed harmlessly over his head before batting away the Bombarda spell with a small shield he created in front of his wand into the path of the Cruciatus curse. The two spells clashed in midair for a moment, and that gave Harry enough time to move away from the path of the Cruciatus curse. Using this chance, the Death Eater dispelled the quicksand spell under his feet, but his feet were still trapped inside the ground. Harry pointed his wand at the trapped man and cast a stunning charm, followed by 2 shield breakers, 1 bone breaker, and another stunning charm. Since the man was trapped, he couldn't move to dodge the spells, so there was only one way the man could protect himself from the first stunning charm, and that is exactly what he did. The man erected a shield to protect himself from the first stunning charm, but his shield was taken apart in the next moment by the 2 shield breakers before the bone breaker hit him on his wand arm, breaking it, and finally, the stunning charm took him out. As the Death Eater fell down, 2 loud cracks were heard from his feet as the bones in his ankle weren't able to support the weight of his body. Harry leaned down, placing hands on his knees as he started to breathe heavily. It was obviously an act, as he wasn't even winded in the slightest. He slowly raised his head and ran his fingers through his hair. His eyes found the figure of Ginevra Weasley. From the looks of it, she had passed out due to the pain. He felt a bit weird, but he hoped that she was all right. He pointed his wand at the Weasley's twins and displeased the petrification charms placed on them, and as soon as they were free, the two of them rushed toward their sister. "Don't wake her up. We don't know how much her body and mind were affected by the Cruciatus curse," Harry warned the twins when he noticed one of the twins was going to wake up the girl. The said twin wanted to complain, but the other twin stopped his twin from acting up before giving Harry a grateful look. He opened his mouth to say something to Harry, but Harry raised his hand to stop the boy from saying anything when he heard a few noises approaching. Harry internally groaned and took a fighting stance. "Wands down! Wands down!" a voice exclaimed from the trilene with his wand pointed at Harry. The man was dressed in red robes, so he was probably an Auror. Harry relaxed a bit, but he didn't lower his wand. "Didn't you hear what I said?" the Auror growled, but Harry still didn't lower his wand. "How do I know you are an Auror?" "You could be one of them pretending to be an Auror," Harry stated firmly as he jerked his head toward the downed Death Eater. The twins were also up on their feet and they had their wands pointed at the Auror while standing protectively in front of their sister. The Auror was taken by surprise by Harry's statement, and a few more red-robed wizard and witches stepped out of the trilene with their wand held in their hands. The first Auror breathed out with an impressed look on his face. "Whoa! You will make Moody proud," the Auror commented before shaking his head. "I am Gawain Roberts and here is my Auror badge." The man fished out his Auror badge and presented it to Harry. Harry narrowed his eyes at the object before nodding his head in satisfaction, and after that, he finally lowered his wand, but he still held it in front of him. Harry knew that it was simply impossible for anyone to duplicate or counterfeit an Auror badge, so he decided to play along for the time being. "What happened here?" Gawain asked, with the rest of the Aurors spreading around. From the looks of it, it seemed that Gawain was in charge. "I was separated from my godfather during an explosion and I couldn't find him due to everyone running around, so I ran into the forest. After that, I was kind of lost and kept walking around until I heard some screams. I decided to check it out and that is when I stumbled here, only to find him." Harry pointed at the Death Eater using some sort of spell on her, which was making her scream. Harry explained. Harry decided not to mention that the man was using the Cruciatus curse, as the Cruciatus curse was one of the unforgivables and this spell was highly frowned upon in Britain, especially with the cruel fate of the Longbottoms. The Imperious curse and the Killing curse were also frowned upon, but Aurors had been allowed to use the Imperious curse and the Killing curse by the end of the war, while the Cruciatus curse was never given the same treatment. "I decided to intervene." Harry mumbled with a shrug. He needed to play the part of a good little hero. "I simply couldn't stand there and do nothing," Harry added in a low tone, but this time there was clear determination in his voice. "We need to have her checked out. I have no idea what spell he was using on her, but it couldn't be anything good," Harry said as he pointed toward Ginevra. Gawain nodded his head in understanding before he turned toward his right and signaled one of the witches. "Check her out." It was probably the Cruciatus curse, Gawain ordered, and the witch immediately started to move. Then he turned toward one of the wizards. "And you, check them out," he ordered the wizard to check out the Weasley twins and Ronald, who was still knocked out. Gawain turned back toward Harry, but before he could say anything else, someone else stepped out of the trilene and spoke up. "How did you take him down? He is an adult and you are only 14 years old. Hand over your wand for inspection," the man demanded, and Harry immediately recognized the man as Barty Crouch, the man responsible for placing his godfather into Azkaban without giving him a trial. Anger surged inside his mind. "No," Harry calmly refused while glaring at the man, surprising everyone in the clearing at his blunt refusal. Chapter 104, The Way He Rolls, 2. "No," Harry calmly refused while glaring at the man, surprising everyone in the clearing with his blunt refusal. Barty Crouch gaped at Harry for a few moments before his face started to turn red in anger. "No?" Barty asked as he slowly inclined his head. "Do you have any idea about your current situation?" the man asked with a scowl, making Harry nod his head. "Of course, I know that," Harry admitted, but still didn't make any movements to hand over his wand. "Then you better hand over your wand for inspection," or Barty growled as he stepped forward in a threatening manner, but before he could finish speaking, Harry cut him off sharply. "Or what?" Harry asked, making the man freeze. "Are you going to throw me into Azkaban without a trial? You do have a habit of doing that," Harry commented viciously, making the Aurors shift uncomfortably. He knew that he was being out of character, but that was basically his plan. To the others, it would look like he was throwing a temper tantrum just like a 14-year-old should when interacting with someone they didn't like, and it wouldn't genius to know why Harry didn't like Barty Crouch. They would simply shelf it as a childish temper tantrum and leave it at that, and the fact that Harry didn't like the man in the slightest obviously helped. To be honest, he really wanted to insult and humiliate the man, and if he could do that while maintaining his already established image, then he wasn't going to complain. "What was the excuse you made?" Harry asked with a confused look on his face as he inclined his head. Yeah. Sirius Black was from the House of Black, what else was I supposed to do?" Harry asked mockingly, making the said man growl, but when he looked around, he realized that he was getting hostile and unhappy looks from some of the Aurors. "Did you say the same for your Death Eater son?" Harry questioned with a knowing look on his face, and Barty blushed in shame, but he realized that he needed to get the situation under control. He needed to re-establish his authority. "You don't know nothing, Bo," Barty growled angrily as his body trembled in anger, but once again he was cut off by Harry before he could even finish. "Who the fuck are you to ask me to hand over my wand?" Harry asked coldly. "You are a fucking nobody. A simple pencil pusher. You have no authority to ask for my wand," Harry finished while glaring down at the man. Meanwhile, Barty was barely holding back his anger. This is the first time anyone has dared to insult and humiliate him in such a manner, but there wasn't much he could do as the boy was right. He didn't have the authority to ask someone to hand over their wand. "Please calm down, Mr. Potter. There is no need for such words." Gawain decided to finally interfere and prevent the altercation from escalating anymore. He realized that he should have stepped before, but he was simply way too surprised to speak before. "What? Did I say anything wrong? He doesn't have any right to ask for my wand." Harry shrugged dismissively as he jerked his chin toward Barty, who was practically sheathing right now, but before anyone else could say anything, another group stepped through the tree line. "Mr. Potter is right. Barty doesn't have any authority to inspect his wand or ask him to hand over his wand for that matter." A middle-aged red-haired woman with a big bust spoke up. The woman was wearing a monocle, and from the looks of it, the woman was Gawain Sr. as Gawain and the other Aurors saluted her. "Harry! The fuck? Where is Sirius and the others?" Tonks exclaimed worriedly as she stepped out of the crowd and rushed at Harry. "Tonks!" Harry exclaimed in surprise, but his surprise turned into a deadpan when Tonks tripped and planted her face on her ground, earning snickers from some of the gathered Aurors and a facepalm from the woman wearing the monocle. Harry's face twitched as he stepped forward and helped Tonks up from the ground, whose hair was cycling through various colors before settling on red. "Are you all right?" Harry asked with a look of concern on his face. "Yeah. I am good." Tonks meekly nodded her head as she was practically mortified. "By the way, why are you here on your own?" Tonks asked after gathering some of her bearings. "I will explain later," Harry said as he didn't know if the Aurors would ask him for a formal statement and then he would need to retell his story for the third time. He didn't want to repeat his story again, and again. "Get some healers here and the two of you," the woman in the monocle called to Aurors while pointing at the Death Eater. "Unmask him, I want to know who he is," Amelia said before she finally turned toward Harry. "Mr. Potter, we would need to take your statement, and while Barty doesn't have any authority to ask for your wand, I do," the woman said as she signaled one of the witches. Of course Harry didn't have any problem handing over his wand for inspection. That was why he cleaned his wand in the first place, but he didn't want to hand over his wand to Barty Crouch. He wanted to show the man his place. Harry held out his wand for the witch to grab his wand. The witch took his wand in her hand and cast Priory Incantatum, and spells he had cast started to replay. "It's clean, ma'am. Some impressive spells are there, but nothing illegal," the witch declared as she turned back toward the woman in the monocle. "Thank you, Connie," the woman stated, and the witch known as Connie handed back the wand to Harry, who accepted his wand with a smile on his face. "Mr. Potter, please visit my office tomorrow with your guardian or your godfather for the statement." "Tonks, you may escort Mr. Potter back to his godfather, he must be really worried," the woman stated as she gave Tonks a pointed look. "Let's go, kiddo," Tonks said as she started to lead Harry away from the clearing, but they stopped when someone called Harry from the back. "Harry, thank you for saving our sister. We really mean it. The Weasley family will always be in your debt." It was the Weasley twins and they were finishing for each other, which was kind of weird. Harry simply gave them a nod before he started to walk again with Tonks leading him through the tree line. "Do they always talk like that?" Harry asked curiously. "Yeah. It's annoying," Tonks groaned as she rubbed her temples. "So, who was that woman?" She seemed to be someone really high up, Harry asked. Even his mom didn't know who the woman was. He was a bit unhappy that he didn't get to see the face of the Death Eater scum. That was Amelia Bones, the director of DMLE. Yeah, she is quite high up. Tonks nodded her head with a grin as she swung her arm around Harry. So, are you going to tell me about your adventure? She asked with a goofy grin marring her face. We had Edgar Bones in the Order, but he was killed, Lily mused aloud as she remembered a red-haired man she had seen in the Order meetings a few times. Well, there was this explosion and I was separated from Sirius. With that, Harry started to tell her the made-up version of his adventure. Oh, Merlin! Harry! There you are! Sirius exclaimed as he rushed at Harry, looking extremely worried. The man kneeled down in front of Harry and pulled him into his arms. He hugged Harry tightly and started to sob. I thought I lost you, Harry. With that, Sirius started to apologize, and now that Harry was finally here, he was feeling slightly bad for leaving him like that, but he didn't have any other choice, so he quickly squashed the little bit of guilt he was starting to feel. I am sorry. I couldn't find you after the explosion and I was so confused with everyone running around. Harry started to explain, but Sirius quickly pulled away and stopped him from speaking anymore. It's all right, Harry. It wasn't your fault. I am simply glad that you are all right. The man smiled, and once again a pang of guilt surged inside Harry's chest, but this time, Harry didn't squash it. He wasn't sure if Sirius was on his side or Dumbledore's, but the man genuinely cared for him. Harry couldn't deny that, so he decided to experience guilt for fooling the man and taking advantage of him. Guys, do you know that Harry saved a damsel in distress? Tonks revealed with a teasing grin on her face, and Harry practically groaned at her words. Really? What happened? Andy asked as she stepped forward. She was also worried about Harry, even though she felt something was off. That is why she didn't speak until now. She had been keeping an eye on Jacqueline, and even though it looked like Jacqueline was worried about Harry, she knew that something was off about the way the girl was acting. Guys! Why don't we go back and listen to his story? Jacqueline suggested pointedly. I am just glad that my best friend is back and he was all right, but I think we should head back, she added, making Sirius, Richard, and Ted nod at her words. She is right, guys. Let's head back, Sirius admitted as he stood up. But you are going to tell us everything about saving this damsel, won't you? Sirius asked with a lecherous grin while wiggling his eyebrows, making Harry groan again. Chapter 105, The Aftermath. Most unique, I. Luton, London. That was foolish beyond proportions. You shouldn't have taken such a huge risk. Sirius exclaimed as he threw his hands up in the air and started to pace angrily. You could have been hurt. Sirius exclaimed, looking extremely angry, frustrated, and worried at the same time. Harry would have found that impressive if he wasn't being chewed out by Sirius, Andy, Ted, Richard, and Olivia. Tonks had to sit this one out as Andy threatened her with embarrassing stories. Brittany would have loved to support him, but unfortunately, her parents were doing the chewing out and she couldn't exactly reveal his secrets, so she had to sit alongside her parents, and Harry believed that it was better this way, at least for the time being. Unsurprisingly, Jacqueline was the only one who was on his side, even though there wasn't much she could say or reveal, as that would be counterproductive for the image Harry was trying to portray. Well, what was I supposed to do, hey? I couldn't have stood there and watched her lose her mind. Harry exclaimed back. I know it could have gone badly. I could have been hurt, or I could have been killed too, but I needed to do something. It was the right thing to do. Harry whispered in a low tone, making all the adults, except for Jacqueline, look uncomfortable. Oh, well. If you put it like that. Andy muttered before shifting uncomfortably on the couch. There wasn't much left to say if Harry put it like that. Ah. I think emotions are too high. What's done is done. There is no changing that past. I think we should sleep it off and talk tomorrow, Ted suggested as he slowly turned toward Sirius, who was staring at the window with a conflicted look on his face. Sirius? The man asked softly, making Sirius turn toward him, and after a few seconds of silence, Sirius finally gave Ted a reluctant nod. Fine, the man nodded his head hesitantly before turning toward Harry. Look, Harry. I was simply worried. I don't want to lose you. I can't lose you, Sirius mumbled before he finally started to leave, and for the third time, Harry felt a bit of guilt bubble inside of him, but this time, he quickly squashed the feeling. He knew where the man was coming from and he would love to come clean, but not yet. He wasn't ready to reveal himself yet. Harry, he really cares about you. You should have seen him when he couldn't find you back at the campsite. Just give him some time to get it out of his system. Your father was like his brother and the death of your parents hit him really hard, Andy said solemnly while patting his shoulder. I know, Harry mumbled while nodding his head. Richard, Olivia, please follow me, I will show you guys your room, Andy said as she started to lead Richard and Olivia upstairs, and the two of them started to follow the former black woman after giving Harry a last look. Don't worry, kiddo. What you did was commendable. They are simply adults, Tonks shrugged with a grin before ruffling his hair. That hurt? Ted placed his hands over his chest with a mock-hurt look on his face. We aren't that bad, but Harry, you did good. Ted gave a respectful nod before he also started to make his way toward the stairs, but before he could start climbing the stairs, Tonks started to speak. Dad. I need to go. With what happened tonight, Madam Bones wants everyone to pull an all-nighter, Tonks explained sheepishly, making Ted simply nod his head. All right. I will pass that on to your mom. Ted cocked his head as he decided to pass over the news to his wife, and then he turned toward Harry, Brittany, and Jacqueline. So, are the three of you going to stay up? If you ask me, the three of you should sleep too, the man suggested, making the three of them exchange glances with each other. I think I am going to call this a day. Harry answered after a small pause. Yeah. It has been a long day and everyone is really tired. Jacqueline nodded her head in agreement. Well, good night, guys. I should get going now. Tonks waved at the four of them as she started to make her way toward the flue. Meanwhile, Harry and the others started to climb the stairs. Good night, guys. Harry waved at them when they finally arrived on the first floor. He parted away from the group and started to make his way toward his room. The others also wished him good night before they started to make their way toward their own rooms. Director's Office, DMLE, Ministry of Magic. The flue flared up and Tonks clumsily stepped through the fireplace. At least, she didn't end up planting her face on the floor. She looked around the room only to find that the others were already there. Sorry, I had to deal with a lot of family drama. Tonks apologized sheepishly. Her rank was the lowest among everyone present inside the room, so she wanted to be as polite as she could be. Don't worry. We only started a few minutes ago. Amelia quickly waved her hand dismissively as she gestured Tonks to take a seat. Tonks mumbled a thanks as she plopped down in the empty seat. Alastair was telling us about the bodies he found inside the forest, Amelia explained briefly for Tonks' sake. As I was saying, it was the work of a cold-hearted bastard. Whoever it was or whoever they were, they didn't hesitate even for a moment. It was like another Thursday for them, Alastair growled gruffly. Even I am impressed by the way they were killed. Extremely systematic and well thought out, Alastair sniffed. So, we have a murder hobo or a group of murder hobos walking around, Amelia groaned in frustration as she rubbed her temples. What can you tell me about the people who were murdered? Amelia asked tiredly. My best guess, they were mercenaries. Wands for hire. I will have to ask some of my contacts to be sure, but I am almost certain that they were mercenaries, Alastair explained thoughtfully. I think the Death Eaters hired them to kill someone while everyone was busy with the distraction, but they either severely underestimated their target or someone else interfered, Alastair added slowly, making Amelia nod her head as she was also thinking along the same lines. Tonks meekly raised her hand and Amelia simply gestured her to continue as she rolled her eyes in exasperation. How many bodies did we find? Tonks asked. 10. I believe they were divided into groups of 3, which means 2 bodies went missing, Alastair finished with a shrug before taking a small sip from his hip flask. Wait. You might be reading too much into this. They could have been a group of 10, to begin with. Gawain Roberts suggested, making Moody frantically shake his head. That doesn't add up. I know how mercenary groups work. They severely underestimated their target or they would have gone with bigger groups, Alastair snarked. I already have an idea about who their target was, Alastair added as he gave Amelia a pointed and meaningful look. Harry Potter? Amelia asked, but it was mostly a rhetorical question. You seriously can't be thinking that Harry could kill all of them, right? I know that you already believe that he is a killer and all that, but even if we go with that, the Dursleys were muggles and these people were adult wizards and witches. They weren't untrained, in fact, they must be quite experienced when it came to combat, Tonks blurted out hurriedly. To be honest, she didn't want to believe that Harry could kill so many cold-bloodedly. I agree with Tonks on this, Alastair. I also don't believe that Harry Potter could have killed them. First of all, Connie had inspected his wand and it was clean, and you said it yourself, it was a systematic and ruthless slaughter. Amelia sighed as she leaned back in her chair. Alastair simply scoffed at the two of them, but before he could say anything, Gawain started to speak. I think he was the target, but someone else intervened, Gawain said as he scratched his chin before he turned toward the witch known as Connie. If the Death Eaters had hired them to kill the boy, then Avery should have known that, right? Did you find something? He asked and Connie simply scowled. So, what did you find, Connie? Amelia also repeated the question as her gaze focused on one of her most trusted aurors, Connie Hammer. She was also interested to know what Connie found. Nothing. The bastard refused to say anything without his lawyer, and Yaxley is taking care of him. You know how much of bitch she is, Connie growled as her body slumped down inside the chair. Yes. Yes, I do know. I also have to deal with that bitch from time to time. Amelia scowled as she nodded her head in agreement. So, we won't be getting anything from him. Amelia rubbed the bridge of her nose. Amelia, please don't tell me that you are still planning to do everything by the books. Alastair asked with a look of horror on his face. Of course, I am not. Amelia snapped before her gaze focused on the hooded figure, who was yet to say anything. That is why Saul will take care of it. Amelia smirked smugly, making the said man perk up. I will. Saul asked unsurely as he never agreed to anything. Yes, you will. If that snake-faced bastard is coming back, then you and your department are fucked too, Amelia retorted smugly. Saul scowled unhappily under his hood. That bastard Rockwood. If he ever got his hands on Rockwood, then he would skin that bastard alive. Fine. I will take care of it. Saul agreed as he stood up from his chair. Chapter 106, The Aftermath Most Unique, 2. By the way, Tonks, Gawain, what do you think of Harry Potter? Amelia asked after Saul left her office through the flu. She could kill for a drink right now, but she knew that the night wasn't over and she needed to be completely sober if she wanted to walk through the night. She slowly took off her monocle and rubbed her eyes. Tonks shifted uncomfortably in her seat as she didn't want to snitch on Harry. He was like her cousin and she didn't want to snitch on her cousin. While Tonks was busy having an internal dilemma, Gawain had already started to speak. He is a normal 14-year-old. Well, not normal since he beat Avery and he did it without sustaining any injuries, Gawain mumbled thoughtfully. I think I know why he is that good, Tonks mumbled meekly while feeling really uncomfortable. She felt like she was betraying the trust of her family, but she still decided to push through. I think Jacqueline Harper has been training him. She easily hooped my ass in a friendly duel, Tonks added with a blush marring on her face. Is she really that good? Connie asked, looking somewhat skeptical. She knew Tonks was good, really good. After all, she was being trained by the legendary Alastair Mad-Eye Moody. Yes, it was a friendly duel, but she still found it somewhat hard to believe that someone as old as Tonks was able to easily beat the girl. Yet, she is really good. I don't think she would have won if she was facing multiple opponents, but even Alastair might lose against her in a duel. She is extremely terrifying with a wand in her hand, Tonks explained, earning incredulous and disbelieving looks from everyone present in the room. Yeah, I know how it sounds, but that is how I felt. She is just that good, Tonks added confidently when she noticed the weird looks she was getting from everyone. She is a duelist, a pretty good one too, so it isn't out of the realm of possibilities that she could beat Tonks, but I still find it hard to believe that she could beat Alastair, Amelia mused aloud, making Tonks shrug unsurely. She said what she believed, it was up to them if they believed her or not. Tonks might be right though. Fighting and dueling are pretty different things and I am no duelist, Alastair admitted unhappily with a huff. It was somewhat painful for him to admit that, but he knew what he could do and what he couldn't. Avery wasn't the best the Death Eaters had during the war, so I think the boy could have beaten him with proper training, Alastair explained with a thoughtful look on his face. Alastair was right. Avery was an experienced combatant, but he wasn't anywhere as good as the Lestranges, Dollahove or Crouch Jr. and Harry Potter faced him in single combat. Yes, it wasn't a formal duel, but the boy did face Avery in single combat, so it wasn't impossible for him to win the fight. All right. I think we should leave it at that for the time being, Amelia declared as she tapped the table with her hand. Let's see what Saul finds out and we will have another meeting after that, Amelia added, and everyone started to stand up. Well then, we will be heading back to Dartmoor, Connie declared as she gave Amelia a last look before making her way toward the floor with the others following her. The others also had things to take care of back in Dartmoor. Gawain and Tonks will be dealing with the aftermath of the attack while Alastair and Connie will be investigating the bodies they found inside the forest. As soon as the four of them were gone, Amelia released a massive sigh and smacked her head on the table. It was a clusterfuck of massive proportions, which painted her department in a really bad light even though it wasn't her department's fault in the first place. At least, her saving grace was that nobody was killed. Well, nobody of importance was killed. Even the Muggles harassed by the Death Eaters were alive, even though they were a bit traumatized. Saul Croker walked down the hall like he owned the place. The halls were mostly empty, but nobody noticed his walk by as he was hiding under an invisibility cloak and his footsteps were also silenced along with his robes. Unlike any other day, St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries was quite busy, thanks to the stunt the Death Eaters pulled. Nobody was directly hurt by the Death Eaters except for the Muggles, but a lot of wizards and witches have received some minor injuries while trying to get away from the campsite. Saul found that truly pathetic. Some people just decided to don some dark capes along with skull masks before throwing around a few spells, and their country was plunged into panic. The minister was already panicking and Saul feared that the man would probably have a stroke if someone told him that Voldemort was back. Maybe, they could use that to get rid of the bumbling fool before it was too late and get someone like Amelia to hold the helm of their country. It wasn't a bad idea at all, Saul decided. Maybe, he should pitch the idea when it becomes obviously relevant. Saul finally arrived on the 4th floor. Avery was kept on this floor under Auror guards, but he wasn't planning to reveal himself to the Aurors in the first place. He needed to carry out his task very subtly and Saul knew how to be subtle. He arrived in front of the room where Avery was being kept, but instead of entering the room, he walked past the room while keeping an eye on the 2 Auror guards standing by the door. He entered the next room and started to tap the wall with his wand. He kept walking by the wall and continued to tap it at regular intervals, and then all of a sudden, he stopped and a massive grin formed on his face. This part of the wall was the thinnest and perfect for what he was planning. He grabbed the pouch which was hanging on his hip and started to draw runes on the wall with the power inside the pouch. It wasn't just any powder, it was ground dragon bones. He nodded his head in satisfaction when he was done and closed the pouch. After that, he placed the tip of his wand on the wall and mumbled something under his breath. The wall shimmered for a moment and the runes disappeared. Moments later, he stepped right through the wall like it wasn't even there. Saul found himself inside Avery's room and started to look around. Thankfully, no Auror guards were posted inside the room, which made his job a lot easier. Avery was sleeping peacefully, but he won't be for long. Saul grinned viciously and walked up to Avery's bed. Once again Saul grabbed a bit of ground dragon powder and sprinkled it on the floor before he started to mumble something. The powder glowed for a second and the air around Saul's surroundings shimmered for a second before the powder sprinkled on the floor disappeared. Saul took off his invisibility cloak and pointed his wand at the sleeping form of Avery and cast Petrifying Charm, but decided to leave his head free. Now that everything else was taken care of, Saul cast the Reviving Charm. Avery's eyes snapped open and he looked around, only for eyes to focus on the hooded figure looming over him. Who? Avery screamed in fright, but before he could scream any more, Saul petrified his head too. You don't need to know, Saul stated flatly. After that, Saul pulled out a syringe from his robes and flicked it with his finger a couple of times. He squeezed the syringe until a tiny droplet trickled out of the tip of the needle. He placed the tip of the needle in the 4 bottle and squeezed it until the syringe was completely empty. Saul noticed the fear in Avery's eyes and smirked in joy. It's not lethal if you don't overdose. It was ecstasy, a Muggle drug. Very useful and very potent, Saul explained cheerfully. In a matter of a couple of minutes, you will be hallucinating and your mind will become vulnerable to intrusions. Saul tapped Avery's head. Now, don't fight it. It will only make it harder for you and I promise, you will lose, Saul promised with a vicious grin on his face. Not that Avery was able to see it, as his face was still obscured by his hood, but his eyes did grow wide when he heard the words. At first, he wanted to sneer when he heard the word Muggle purely on instinct, but he was petrified, but he was left horrified by the time Saul finished his explanation. Avery knew what was going to happen to him. Whoever this person was, he was planning to use legilimency on him. He was quite familiar with the spell as he had seen the Dark Lord had used it quite a few times, and that was exactly why he knew that he needed to fight. So he fought, not that it helped. He started to hallucinate all the same and Saul easily slipped into his mind. Chapter 107, The Aftermath Most Unique, 3. Saul rummaged through Avery's mind and he had to scrunch his face when he came across what Avery was hallucinating. Saul was no greenhorn as he had witnessed a lot of messed up stuff during the war, but there were a few things he could never get used to. Ignoring the man's depraved hallucinations, he started to look for anything relevant inside his mind, and only a few moments later, he stumbled upon something he was looking for. He found the memory of Lucius Malfoy informing Avery and a few other people about his plan to have Harry Potter killed after the Quidditch World Cup finals. Thankfully, Avery looked around and Saul recognized almost everyone present inside the room. Unsurprisingly, almost everyone attending the meeting were pardoned Death Eaters who were apparently impersoned by Voldemort to join his forces and commit terrible atrocities during the war. Saul shook his head and decided to move on with the memory. At the end of the memory, he finally discovered the fact that Lucius had asked Avery to kill some of the Weasley children. So, that is why he went out of his way to attack the Weasley children inside the forest, Saul concluded. 100,000 galleons was a lot of gold, and Saul had to admit, Lucius knew very well how to use the ridiculous amount of gold rotting inside the Malfoy vaults. At least, Alastair's suspicion was right, Saul mused as he started to look for something else. Lucius Malfoy was responsible for hiring the mercenaries, but Avery had no idea what happened to them, except for the fact that they failed to kill the boy. Saul soon stumbled upon the memory of the duel. Saul was neither a fighter, nor was he a duelist, he was more of an assassin, a subtle knife to be used from the back, but he had to admit, Harry Potter was good for someone of his age. Saul mentally nodded his head in approval before the red beam struck Avery and the string of memories he was viewing came to an end. Now that there was nothing else Saul wanted to learn from Avery, he started to pull out of his mind, but then all of a sudden, he froze when he came across a memory related to the Dark Mark. Apparently, the Dark Mark was becoming darker and some of the Death Eaters believed that the Dark Lord was finally coming back. Avery was currently sitting on the fence, but he would happily return to service if Voldemort really came back. Saul felt somewhat bitter as the memory finally came to an end. He always wanted to conduct some experiments on the Dark Mark, it intrigued him. He wanted to know how the mark was given and what were its functions. He wanted to know how it worked. He wanted to know how it ticked. Alas, Saul never got the chance to conduct experiments on the Dark Mark as his rank wasn't that high during the war, so he never got the clearance. Saul absent-mindedly pulled himself out of Avery's mind. To be honest, he had no idea how to deal with the fact that Voldemort was getting stronger. He didn't even know in what state Voldemort was or where the monster was, but the Death Eaters believed that Voldemort was about to return, which wasn't good from his perspective as they weren't prepared to handle another war right now and there was no way Harry Potter was ready to face the man. After contemplating for some time, he simply decided to return and reveal the information he acquired from Avery to Amelia and the others. Saul might be the current head of the Department of Mysteries, but almost all of his leadership skills were related to research. He had no idea how to deal with an upcoming war and he had a nagging feeling that this war was going to be more horrible than the last one. Amelia was simply better suited than him to handle the upcoming war in every possible way. He glanced back at Avery. He had a glassy-eyed look in his eyes and he seemed to be drooling too as his head had lolled to the side. He sneered and pointed his wand at the man. Obliviate, he removed the memories of their interaction from Avery's mind. There was no way he was going to leave anything behind to compromise himself. Well, the healers might still find traces of the drugs in Avery's bloodstream, but Yaxley would be blamed for that. Well, Yaxley was a bitch so it was okay. Aren't you going to sleep? I thought you were tired, Lily asked in an unsure tone while watching the world through Harry's eyes. Sleep is overrated and I do have some things to deal with, Harry answered her after a few moments of silence. Such as? Lily asked in an irritated tone as Harry was hiding all of his thoughts from her. Not that it would have helped her as he was thinking several times faster than she could even start to comprehend, and if she did try to understand what he was thinking, it would simply give her a massive headache. Did you see how Tonk's hair was changing color or how her body shape keeps changing from time to time? Harry asked and Lily simply gave him a slow nod, unsure of where he was going with his line of questions. I know how she does that, and I am working on how to replicate her powers, Harry answered with a grin, making Lily gape like a fish out of water. Is that even possible? I mean, I know you can learn any spell with a single glance, but isn't her power a part of her bloodline? Lily asked slowly after a few seconds of silence. She licked her lips in anticipation. If her Hadrian could really copy bloodlines, then it was a huge deal. Not exactly. I can't copy her bloodline, but I replicate it with my own magic. Her power basically allows her to transfigure her body without a wand, and I can also transfigure my body without a wand, Harry explained with a shrug. You do know that human transfiguration is extremely dangerous, right? Lily asked skeptically even though she was grinning like a loon. She simply wanted to make sure that her Hadrian was playing it safe. I know. That is why I am currently running scenarios inside my head, instead of giving it a try. I want to make sure that everything is safe. I don't want to turn into a slug, and I am also trying to see how far I can push this power, Harry explained thoughtfully, making Lily frown at the end of his explanation. What do you mean by how far I can push this power? Lily asked with a hint of concern in her voice. You see, Tonks can change her muscle structure and I can too. What if I transfigure my muscles into dragon's muscles? What if I transfigure my eyes into a cat's eyes for night vision? Harry gushed out, his voice filled with excitement. No, Hadrian. That can't be safe. Lily exclaimed in alarm while frantically shaking her head. Your bones won't be able to handle the power of dragon's muscles, she warned him in a stern tone. That is exactly why I am running these scenarios inside my head. I don't want to end up in a crumpled mess. You see, I can also increase the density of my bones too so that I can handle strong muscles. I can already increase the density of my muscles and my bones by 10% safely, Harry explained with a grin, making Lily freeze and contemplate his words for the next few seconds. All right. Just be careful and safe, Lily gave him the seal of approval even though she was kind of reluctant. Though, aren't you putting too much into your plate? Lily asked worriedly. Harry knew that she was right. Right now, he had too much on his plate and he was still adding more things to his list to do. He was learning soul magic, so he could find a way to separate her soul from his body. Then he was learning fleshcraft so that he could build her a body. He was also learning Muggle biology to learn about human organs as much as he could. He was learning mystic arts from the Ancient One. He was learning various spells from her library. He was also working on giving the mystic arts spells a personal touch. He was planning to create his own dark mark, and now he was working on how to replicate Tonks' metamorphmagus abilities, and push them even further. Harry grimaced, but moments later, his grimace was replaced by a look of determination. He couldn't stop right now. Making his mom a new body was his top priority, and at the same time, he couldn't stop growing stronger. His enemies were already making their moves, so there was no way he could take it easy right now, but he knew that Lily was right. At this rate, he might end up working himself into an early grave even with all of that genius in his arsenal. He needed something to deal with his excessive workload, and that is when something clicked inside his mind. I think I need a second brain, Harry mused with a grin, making Lily choke before she started to cough hysterically. Chapter 108, The Aftermath Most Unique, 4. Harry, sorry for yesterday. I didn't mean to scream at you. I was simply worried, you know, Sirius apologized sullenly. Last night, after returning to his room, he gave it a lot of thought and he realized that he was being unreasonable to Harry even though his concerns were valid. He couldn't be angry at Harry for trying to save the Weasley children when he would have done the same if he was in Harry's shoes. It's okay, Sirius. I am sorry too. I know how you feel about losing me, but I simply couldn't hide and watch. I had to do something, Harry mumbled, looking down at his feet. Yes, he did feel somewhat bad and guilty for making Sirius and the others worry like that, but he was getting fed up with the way they were treating him. All of them were treating him like he was a glass statue, and after living for this long without any supervision was making him feel annoyed, extremely annoyed. I know. I know. I am proud of you for that, Sirius said as he patted him on his back. Really? Harry asked in a hopeful tone as he finally raised his head to look at Sirius. His face marred with childish excitement, though on the inside, he was hoping that he wasn't laying it on too thick. That would be cringy as hell. Sirius beamed at him with a bright smile on his face as he nodded his head. Come on, let's go inside. The others must be waiting for us, and we also need to head to the ministry for the statement, Sirius reminded with a smile on his face. Yeah, Harry slowly nodded his head as he followed Sirius inside the house. Just like every other day, Harry woke up early and decided to make his way to the massive backyard. Jacqueline joined him after half an hour, and since then they have been training casually until Sirius finally arrived and asked Harry if he could talk with him privately. Jacqueline simply smiled at Sirius and Harry before leaving, and here they were. You must be really good, right? I mean, you beat an adult, Sirius inquired with a proud look on his face, and Harry simply shrugged. I don't know, but I think so. I have been training with Jacqueline for years, so I am probably a lot better than my peers, Harry admitted unsurely, making Sirius frown thoughtfully. He already knew that Harry was planning to continue his dueling career even though he wasn't sure if he would carry on that profession long into his life. Well, I think you are downplaying yourself quite a bit. Sirius trailed off when they finally entered the dining hall. The others immediately noticed their arrival and turned toward them. So, did you two finally make it up? Andy asked with a soft smile on her face as she ushered the two of them toward the table. Sirius and Harry both glanced at each other before Sirius finally decided to take the lead on this. Yes. Yes. We did. Sirius beamed at her as he swung his arm around Harry's shoulder. Where is Tonks, by the way? Sirius asked as last night he had left before Tonks announced that she probably needed to pull an all-nighter. She hasn't returned yet, Andy sniffed dispassionately. As a lady, she shouldn't be staying up nights. It might ruin her health, but does she ever listen to me? Andy rolled her eyes in exasperation. Harry almost snorted when Andy called Tonks a lady. She was far from anything prim and proper. She had more of a goth and punk look going for her. Sirius smiled warily as he pulled back a chair and sat down with Harry following his example. Everything looks boiled, Harry muttered dryly as he checked out the menu. It's healthy, Andy sniffed haughtily before she started to serve everyone their breakfast. Don't you have an appointment in the ministry? Andy asked while staring at Harry, and he simply nodded his head. Then hurry up and eat your food, Andy instructed as she presented him with a plate filled with boiled food. Harry accepted the plate and started to dig in. No one was following any sort of formality, so it was all right for him to start eating on his own. By the way, who will you be taking with you? Ted asked as he also started to dig into his food. He was a lawyer, so he wanted to know if the ministry was following their laws or not. They asked me to bring my guardian with me or my godfather. I am planning to take them both. So, what do you guys think? Up for a trip? Harry asked, looking at Jacqueline and Sirius. The two of them immediately nodded their heads in agreement. After that, they simply engaged in some small talk and easy topics until they finished their food. After finishing their breakfast, Harry, Jacqueline, and Sirius bid the others farewell before the three of them stepped into the floor one by one. The three of them arrived on the second floor of the Ministry of Magic, and after asking for directions, they pointed toward Connie Hammer's office. Throughout their walk, Harry kept receiving weird looks from some of the Aurors, but none of them approached him. The three of them finally arrived in front of Connie Hammer's office, and Sirius knocked on the door. Come in, they heard a tired feminine voice from inside the room. They entered the room only to find a woman probably in her late 20s sitting behind a desk. She had dark circles under her eyes and her eyes were bloodshot too. It was clear that the woman required sleep. Mr. Black, Mr. Potter, and Miss Harper, I presume the three of you are here for Mr. Potter's statement? The woman asked, even though they all knew it was a rhetorical question. Of course, so what do I need to do? Harry asked as he stepped forward. Nothing much, for the time being, all of you please take a seat. I just need to call someone to record the statement and then we can start. The woman as she gestured the three of them to take a seat and pressed a rune on her table. After a few seconds, someone knocked on the door. Come in, Connie called, and a young wizard entered the room. Nigel, we will be taking Mr. Potter's statement, please get everything set up, Connie said while staring at the man who just entered the room. The man nodded his head and walked up to her table and pulled out a notebook and a quill from his robes. This is Nigel Brown, recording the statement of Harry Potter, and Senior Auror Connie Hammer will be taking the statement. The man spoke loudly as he started to write down something on his notepad before turning toward Connie. Mr. Potter, tell me everything from the start. Connie trailed off as she leaned down on the table. Harry took a deep breath and started to tell her everything from the start. Time skip, a few hours later. Harry raced past Sirius on his broom and the man exclaimed loudly in mock outrage. It only took Harry an hour to provide his statement, and after making sure that Harry wasn't going to get charged for whatever reason, they returned to Sirius Mansion to relax and enjoy the rest of the day. Unfortunately, Brittany had to leave with her parents as they had some family trips planned beforehand. After lunch, they decided to have a small flying competition where they would need to catch a snitch. Harry, Sirius, Jacqueline, and Tonks were participating in this impromptu flying game, and even though Harry didn't like Quidditch that much, he decided to indulge his godfather to make up for last night. He had to admit, it was working as his godfather seemed to be enjoying himself. Harry finally noticed the snitch all of them were looking for, but somehow, he wasn't the first one to notice the little bugger. Surprisingly, it was Tonks who noticed the snitch before him, and Harry would never admit it, but he was somewhat annoyed over the fact that it wasn't him who noticed the snitch before anyone else. With all of his power, it should have been him who should have noticed the snitch. He quickly squashed the annoyance he was experiencing. Shockingly, Tonks was a good flyer. Thankfully, she wasn't as clumsy on a broom as she was on the ground. She was probably even better than him on a broom. Now that Harry thought about it, it wasn't that surprising, since Tonks was on the Quidditch team while Harry never flew competitively. He only flew because he loved flying. Now that the snitch was in his sight, Harry decided to make a dive in that direction. Tonks also noticed his approach from the corner of her eyes and leaned down over her broom to increase her speed. "Keep dreaming. I am going to catch the snitch!" Tonks exclaimed gleefully as she extended her hand toward the snitch, and instead of going for a retort, he simply growled and pushed his broom even harder, but then all of a sudden, he and Tonks pulled up when the ground came up and the snitch did a 90-degree turn and flew up in the air, but before the two of them could reach out toward the snitch, Sirius caught the golden contraption in his hand. "Wahahaha! Who's the boss? Who's the boss?" Sirius started to ask cheekily with a smug look on his while showing off the snitch to his competitors. "Praise me more!" Sirius declared haughtily only to receive annoyed looks from the three as they started to fly down toward the ground. "Hey, guys! Wait up! Don't leave me up here!" Sirius exclaimed apologetically as he followed suit. "I am sorry for acting like a pure-blood arse," Sirius apologized, and Harry was the first one to stop. He turned around and gave the man a smug grin followed by the other two, and Sirius immediately realized what was happening. They were playing with him. He was about to scream in mock outrage, but Harry took the wind out of his sails with his next statement. "You know, I have been doing some thinking. I have decided to accept your offer, you know, about the adoption," Harry declared with a soft smile, and Sirius barely stopped himself from falling off the broom. Chapter 109, The Heir of Blacks. "Harry, I know I am sounding like a broken record, but I believe I must do this." Sirius trailed off with a somewhat nervous look on his face, but before he could continue, he froze when Harry glared at him. "If you are going to ask me if I am sure, then I am going to punch you," Harry growled, making Sirius raise his hands in the air as the universal sign of surrender. "There is no need to get violent. I was simply making sure. I just wanted to make sure that you are absolutely sure about this, as there will be no going back," Sirius pointed out worriedly. "I am sure, Sirius," Harry assured Sirius for probably the 50th time that he was sure. "If the two of you have finally made up your mind, shall we move on?" "I don't have the whole day and time is gold," the goblin snapped at the duo, and Harry's temper flared at the words. "You will do what you are getting paid to do, goblin. We aren't paying you to run your mouth," Harry snapped back, making the goblin fume, but he decided to remain silent as Harry was absolutely right. After Voldemort, Death Eaters, and Dumbledore, goblins were the beings Harry hated the most. "Whoa! Whoa! Calm down, Harry. There is no need to snap at him," Sirius quickly chastised Harry, but it was clear that Sirius wasn't angry at him or anything. The man was simply concerned that Harry decided to snap at a goblin out of the blue. Harry didn't even bother to deign him with an answer. Sirius simply sighed and turned toward the goblin. "Please don't mind him, he is simply too stressed," Sirius apologized for Harry, trying to defuse the situation. Sirius wasn't buddy-buddy with goblins, but he didn't want to start hating their race. After all, he was nothing like the rest of his family. The goblin simply harumphed haughtily, and Harry simply scowled at his godfather. Maybe he should instigate another goblin rebellion after Voldemort, Dumbledore, and their fanatics were dealt with. Maybe he was onto something there. "Is there a way he can become my heir without giving up his last name or taking up my family name?" Sirius asked as he leaned forward on the table. Yesterday, Harry revealed that he had decided to accept the offer, so now here they were, sitting with the goblin in charge of the black accounts inside a Gringotts meeting room, hashing out the details before they could finally go through with the adoption thing. After Harry revealed his decision to Sirius, they decided to have a family discussion, as there were a few things they needed to decide beforehand. For example, if Harry wanted to give up his family name, or if he wanted to add his godfather's last name to his name. Apparently, Harry wanted neither. He wanted to keep his name as it was. Ted wasn't sure, but he believed that there was an option, so here they were. "Yes, it is possible, but then your heir." The goblin spat out with a bit of venom in his voice. "Won't be able to inherit the black family seat in Wizengamot," the goblin answered, and Sirius glanced nervously toward his godson. It was clear that the goblin wasn't happy with Harry's conduct, but from the look on Harry's face, Sirius realized that his godson didn't seem to be bothered in the slightest. "Is there a way to get around that?" "I am certain that there must be some law," Harry asked slowly, and the goblin looked somewhat reluctant before ultimately, he started to speak again. "Yes. There are two ways. There have been some instances in the past where wizards have refused or failed to take the last name of another family for various reasons, hence we do have some solutions. The goblin drawled slowly. He was being intentionally slow with the explanation. First of all, you can give the black surname to one of your children, or you could give the black surname to your wife, the goblin answered with a hint of bitterness in his voice, and Harry knew why the goblin was acting like that. If it was up to the goblin, then he wouldn't have given a solution to Harry and Sirius, but since Harry specifically asked for a solution, the goblin was forced to cough up the solution to their problems. Kiddo. You don't need to force yourself to do something you don't want to do. I don't have any problems if my family dies off. In fact, I would be glad if my family dies off with me. Sirius revealed his opinion on the matter, only for Harry to shake his head. I understand where you are coming from, Sirius, but having the black seat on Wizengamot would be quite helpful for me, Harry answered. There was no way he was going to give up so much political clout willingly. He wasn't a fan of politics, but he wouldn't mind politicking if it became necessary. By the way, don't I have a family seat in the Wizengamot too? Harry asked when all of a sudden he remembered that Potters also used to have a seat in Wizengamot according to his mom. Yeah, you still have, but it has been idle since your father died. You will be able to reactivate it if you wish as soon as you reach your majority, Sirius answered thoughtfully. Can I reactivate it right now? I mean with you being my guardian? Harry asked, and Sirius gave him a hesitant nod. I guess, it can wait for the time being, Harry mused aloud when he realized that Sirius didn't look enthusiastic when he asked that. Additionally, Harry didn't want to continue this line of conversation in front of a goblin. So, I won't be changing my name. Harry turned toward the goblin and said while nodding his head. All right. It's your call, wizard. Now, both of you come here, the goblin ordered the two of them as he placed a small potion vial on the table. Let's get this over with, the goblin snapped impatiently, and even though Harry wanted to tear into the goblin, he decided to hold his tongue. His time will come and the goblins would rue the day they looked down at him. What do we need to do? Sirius asked curiously as he stared at the potion vial on the table. The goblin grinned fearfully and placed a long intricate knife on the table, making Sirius gulp nervously as his gaze shifted toward the long knife. Cut your hand and drop a few drops of blood in this potion vial until I tell you to stop. The goblin opened the potion vial and placed it on the table. Sirius gulped for a second time as he picked up the knife and made a cut in his hand. He winced as the blade sliced into his palm, but he still held his hand over the potion vial. That's enough, the goblin called out, and Sirius finally removed his hand from over the potion vial. The goblin closed the vial and gave it a good little shake. There, the potion is ready. Now, your heir only needs to drink that, and after we sign all the documents I have prepared beforehand, we will be done here, the goblin revealed, making Sirius look at the goblin incredulously. Wait. That's it? Sirius exclaimed with an incredulous look on his face. Yes, that's it, Lord Black, the goblin confirmed before turning toward Harry. Now if you may. The goblin pushed the potion vial toward Harry. Harry had already researched the ritual to a T. It was a simple ritual and a person would only need to ingest a potion. He could have performed the ritual anywhere in Britain, but it was highly illegal, so damn. In Britain, all rituals without any exception were banned, and this particular ritual involved blood, which could be translated into blood magic, and any form of blood magic will get you thrown into Azkaban if caught. So, double damn. Though there was a tiny loophole. Gringotts is a part of Goblin territory, which means that Gringotts isn't a part of magical Britain, so they could perform this little adoption ritual inside Gringotts without facing any consequences. Harry picked up the potion vial and stared at it for the next few seconds. What the goblin and Sirius didn't notice was the fact that Harry wasn't idle. In fact, he was casting detection charms with the same hand to see if the potion was safe or not. There was no way he was going to blindly trust anything given by the goblins. When he was finally satisfied with the results, he uncorked the vial and gulped down the contents in one go. He grimaced at the taste, and for a moment, he lost his footing, but Sirius quickly stepped in and helped his godson to stay on his feet. Harry shook his head, but he was still feeling like his head was spinning. I am all right. I am all right. Harry mumbled as he balanced himself, and clarity finally started to return to him. How long will it take the potion to run its course? Harry asked the goblin. 6 hours at least, and 10 hours at most. It depends on how much magic the blood carries, the goblin said, making Harry nod his head in understanding. From what he knew about the blacks, he was going to have a long day. Come on, Godfather. Let's get the documents signed and leave this place, Harry said as he turned toward Sirius, who nodded his head with a grin as he also wanted to get over with this as soon as he could. Chapter 110, A Wrong Turn, I. Daphne Greengrass shot up from her bed, breathing heavily. A bit of moonlight was filtering through the windows inside the room, so the room wasn't completely dark. Daphne continued to breathe heavily for the next few moments before she finally looked down at her hands. She moved her hands as she kept staring at them intently, and moments later, a deranged look appeared on her face. She finally stopped moving her hands and placed them over her face. Keek! A bit of mad cackle escaped her lips before she placed both of her hands over her mouth to stop herself from cackling in mad glee. It worked. It fucking worked! She exclaimed gleefully inside her mind. It was a gamble on her part. A gamble which probably shouldn't have worked, but here she was. She knew that she had achieved something impossible. Everyone she talked with had told her that her plan was foolish and impossible, but here she was, back. She proved them wrong. She proved all of them wrong. She succeeded where the others failed. She successfully traveled back in time. She had discovered early in her research that it was impossible to travel back in time, at least, literally, but it was possible to send your memories and magic back in time without creating a paradox. It might sound simple as that, but in reality, it was much more complicated than that. It took her a bit more than 2 decades to finally come up with a way to send her memories and magic back in time, and even then she wasn't sure that it would work, but she didn't have anything to lose, so she decided to move forward with her foolish, but amazing plan. Luckily, it paid off and she was back in the past. Then all of a sudden, something clicked inside her mind. What the fuck happened to my younger self? She asked herself, and she immediately regretted asking that as her vision turned blurry, and before she could do anything else, her world went black. The next time Daphne woke up, she found herself in a very familiar space of unending grassland. There was no way she wouldn't know this place. This was the barebones of her mindscape. She was a prodigy when it came to mind arts, and she was extremely proud of that fact, not that it helped her much after that war broke out. She still remembered how proud she felt when she successfully created a mindscape when she was only 13. Now that she is back here, it brought back so many of her memories, most of which were quite painful. She quickly shook her head to clear her mind. This wasn't the time to reminisce. She needed to know what the hell was happening and deal with it as quickly as possible. She finally looked down at herself, and much to her horror, she found herself back in her adult body. Who are you? She snarled from behind, and she immediately whirled around, only to find herself staring at her younger self. Her younger self's eyes grew wide in shock and surprise. Who the fuck are you? Why the hell do you look like me? Her younger self questioned her threateningly. Of course, I look like you. After all, I am you, just older, Daphne answered, making her younger self frown. Impossible. Who are you trying to fool? Her younger self scoffed derisively. If you don't tell me who you are, then I am going to toss you out of my mind, her younger self threatened her. I don't know if I would die if she throws me out of her body, but I can't risk it. I can't let her do that. Daphne scowled unhappily. My mission is way too important. If I need to kill her, then that is what I will do, she decided inside her mind, and she immediately lunged at her younger self, whose eyes grew wide in shock. Daphne already knew that she didn't have her wand inside the mindscape, so she didn't even try to reach for her wand, as it would have been a waste of time. Instead, she decided to attack her younger self physically. Daphne punched her younger self, who fell back on her arse. Her younger self clutched her face in pain and curled into a ball while clutching her face. Hey! Was I really that weak? Daphne wondered internally before she straddled her younger self and forcefully turned her over. Daphne did feel a bit bad as she wrapped her hands around her younger self's throat and started to choke her. Her younger self started to struggle and throw her legs. Daphne knew how weak she was in her Hogwarts years, something she regretted for years when the war finally broke out. Her younger self grabbed her hands and started to struggle more intensely, but Daphne was bigger and stronger than her younger self. Her younger self's eyes started to roll back and her face also started to turn blue. Though Daphne didn't stop strangling her younger self. She wasn't sure if she could do this again, as she could feel guilt welling up inside her mind. Her younger self shakily raised her hands in an attempt to push off Daphne from her, and from the looks of it, it was probably her final struggle, so Daphne didn't try to stop her younger self, as she knew that her younger self didn't have the power to push her off. Her younger self placed both of her hands on Daphne's face, and that is when Daphne was blinded by a bright flash. Fuck this shite! Daphne cursed loudly inside her mind. She was this close to killing her younger self, but before she could think any more, memories started to flash through her mind. She quickly clamped down on her occlumency shields, but the memories continued to flash through her mind and it took her a moment to realize that these weren't her memories. These were her younger self's memories. The reason why she thought these were her memories was because her younger self's memories were completely identical to her memories, but the memories finally started to deviate when her younger self went to Hogwarts. Daphne was left completely shocked when she saw that Harry Potter wasn't attending Hogwarts. In fact, the so-called boy who lived was attending Ilvermorny. According to the Daily Prophet, Albus Dumbledore had decided to send the Golden Boy to another country for his safety. Her mind started to whirl around in panic as she realized that this wasn't her world. There was no troll in her younger self's first year. Quirrell never disappeared at the end of the first year. There was no message written by blood in her younger self's second year and there were no petrifications too. Daphne grabbed her head in despair when she saw that Sirius Black never escaped Azkaban in her younger self's third year, so her younger self never came across a Dementor. Daphne couldn't help but feel jealous of her younger self. Her younger self never came across one of those soul-sucking monsters, nor did she have to walk through the halls of Hogwarts in fear during her second year. Daphne quickly squashed the feeling as she decided to move on with the memories and once again she was surprised to find that Peter Pettigrew was caught in this timeline and Sirius Black was a free man. What was even more surprising was the fact that it was Albus Dumbledore who caught Peter Pettigrew. She was never a fan of Albus Dumbledore and the way he led the war made her hate him even more. Daphne thought that there wasn't anything else that could surprise her anymore, but she was proven wrong when she came across one of the recent memories of her younger self. Apparently, Harry Potter was visiting Britain for the Quidditch World Cup and his picture was splashed across the front page of one of the recent editions of the Daily Prophet. Harry Potter looked nothing like she remembered him from memories. This Harry Potter didn't look like a homeless vagabond, nor did he look scrawny. This Harry Potter looked much better. She realized that he was probably bigger and stronger too. Now, Daphne was completely sure that this was a completely different world altogether. Daphne didn't know what to feel. She felt kind of lost and she didn't even notice the fact that she was back to the unending grassland. It seems that the ritual didn't work as you expected. Her younger self asked and Daphne slowly raised her head to stare at her younger self. Immeasurable amount of guilt washed over her. This wasn't even her world and she almost killed her younger self, who was completely innocent. Her legs trembled for a moment before she dropped to her knees. Her will to fight left her, only to be replaced by shame and guilt. As you must have realized. This isn't your world, the other Daphne said, making the older Daphne feel even more horrible. Sorry. I am so sorry. The older Daphne said as tears started to roll down her eyes. What was she going to do now? This wasn't her world? Her other self had a perfect life and basically stole that from her. Why are you apologizing? The younger Daphne snapped as she stomped toward her older version and grabbed her face. The younger Daphne forced the older one to look into her eyes. Our worlds might be different, but that doesn't mean that there are no threats. Didn't you see what happened at the end of the Quidditch World Cup? The younger Daphne snapped at the older one. Chapter 111, A Wrong Turn, 2. Yes, she's right. The Death Eater's attack still happened and Barty Crouch Jr. still escaped the clutches of his father and cast the dark mark, the older Daphne realized, which meant that there were still some similarities between their world. Voldemort returned at the end of her fourth year and killed Harry Potter of her world in the graveyard. After that, he decided to lie low and consolidate his power. While the deaths of Cedric Diggory and Harry Potter were a tragedy, the Ministry chucked it up by declaring their deaths accidents. While the incident was really horrible, nobody thought much of it and moved on. Albus Dumbledore tried to tell everyone that Voldemort was back, but nobody believed him. With the Daily Prophet running a smear campaign calling him senile, people stopped listening to him. Much to Daphne's shame, she was one of them who believed that Dumbledore had finally lost his mind. Her parents and sister agreed with her, but everything changed at the end of her fifth year when Lucius Malfoy paid them a visit and told them to swear allegiance to the Dark Lord. They obviously refused since they thought that it was a ruse and they didn't think that Lucius would try anything untoward to their family as Astoria was betrothed to Draco. Though their confidence disappeared when the Dark Lord himself decided to pay them a visit the next day along with his Death Eaters. He brought down their wards and attacked their manor. He didn't kill them, but he made them kneel before him. After that, he had politely asked them to join him, and her father agreed as there was no other option. Green grasses were businessmen, not fighters. The Dark Lord laughed as he placed his brand on her father like he was a cattle, and they thought their nightmare was probably over, but they couldn't have been more wrong. He ordered his Death Eaters to leave and he started to leave himself, but he stopped at their doorstep and turned around before he cast the skin-rotting curse on Astoria. Up to this day, she still remembered the screams of her sister and the words the monster said to them, that was for refusing my first offer when I was being generous. She still had nightmares of that night. After that, even though it hurt them, they fell in line as there wasn't much they could have done and her parents wanted her to survive. By the time the Dark Lord finally revealed himself to the rest of the wizarding world, it was already too late for the opposition to do anything. The Dark Lord took over the ministry in a single day, and after that, he started to systematically eradicate his enemies. He killed anyone who dared to defy him or oppose him, and by the end of another year, all of his enemies were constricted inside Hogwarts while the rest of Wizarding Britain was under his control. Albus Dumbledore and Neville Longbottom, the second chosen one, tried their best to put up a fight, but within 2 more years Hogwarts finally fell and Albus Dumbledore fell with it as he decided to hold the fort and fight till his last breath so that the others could escape. Many escaped, but many didn't. Some of the survivors decided to leave Britain altogether while even fewer of them decided to stay and fight. After that, the Dark Lord finally declared himself the Emperor of Britain and started to gather forces so that he could start taking over the Muggle forces. She was forced to join his army, and she was also given a high-ranking position thanks to her status of being a pure blood. She had never forgiven the Dark Lord for killing her sister, but she didn't have much choice in the matter. She convinced herself that everything will be all right, but everything went to shit when someone framed her family as traitors for whatever reason. The Death Eaters attacked their manor without giving them a chance to defend themselves. Her father decided to stay behind to hold back the Death Eaters so she and her mother could escape. For the next few months, the two of them stayed on the run, but then all of a sudden, her mother's health started to deteriorate. She didn't know what was happening to her mother and she couldn't exactly take her mother to St. Mungo's and she didn't have the gold to hire a private healer. When she thought their situation couldn't get any worse, the Dark Lord decided to attack Buckingham Palace and kill the Queen and the rest of her family before declaring himself the Emperor of Britain on live TV. Of course, pandemonium followed as the statute was broken, but the Dark Lord was much better prepared than she was expecting him to be. At first, she didn't know much about nuclear weapons, but when she saw what those horrible weapons could do, she thought that the wizarding world was going to be eradicated, but much to her surprise, the Dark Lord used those horrible weapons against the Muggles. His Death Eaters were somehow able to infiltrate the Muggle forces and after that, they used the Imperious Curse to make the Muggles attack their own forces using nuclear weapons. Even though the Muggles took a heavy hit thanks to the nuclear weapons, they were far from defeated. Religious fanatics started to crawl out of the woodwork and started to kill anyone they suspected to be a wizard or a witch. That was when by some coincidence, she came across Hermione Granger. She remembered the girl from Hogwarts, but she had never interacted with the girl when they were in Hogwarts. Thankfully, the two of them were among Muggles and that was probably why Granger didn't attack her. Even though she didn't want to, she knew that Granger was probably the only one who could help her mother. Even if Granger couldn't, she wanted to have someone to talk with. After the death of her sister, she had grown quite distant and she didn't have any friends as all of her classmates were Death Eaters or Death Eater sympathizers. Granger was obviously on guard and wanted nothing to do with her until she told Granger about the fate of her sister and father. That was how Daphne got involved with the Resistance. The Resistance did have some healers and they did try to heal her mother, but unfortunately, they didn't have the necessary resources to heal her. With the resources they had with them, they could at most make her mother's departure comfortable. Obviously, she wasn't happy, but that was the only option she had. It was hard to let her mother go, especially with the fact that her mother was the last of her family. To distract herself from the pain, she dedicated herself to work with the Resistance. At first, most of the Resistance members were suspicious of her, but to be honest, she didn't care about them. After months of working with the Resistance, she discovered that Neville Longbottom, the second chosen one, was still alive and kicking. Apparently, he was being kept hidden because he was the only one who could defeat the Dark Lord. She never believed that the boy could ever defeat that monster, but she still continued to fight as that was all she could do. Sometime during that, her mother also passed away and it was a hard time for her. Meanwhile, the war with the Muggles was also picking up as they were finally starting to fight back and the Muggles weren't differentiating between the Dark Lord's forces and the Resistance. They were killing any wizard or witch without exception. That made their task even harder, but she wasn't dissuaded. She continued to fight along with the Resistance and almost 8 years later, Neville finally decided to make his move. Apparently, he along with a select few members of the Resistance knew how to kill the Dark Lord, but they never told her, as even after fighting along with them for 8 years, she wasn't trusted enough. Unfortunately, Longbottom and his harebrained plan failed as he decided to follow Albus Dumbledore's legacy and fought with stunners and disarming charms. She would have said good riddance, but thanks to his utterly foolish actions, everyone who knew how to kill the Dark Lord died along with him. The bastard didn't even leave anything behind to clue them in, so after his death, the resistance was left broken. Most of their members decided to disappear into obscurity when they realized that they couldn't win. Thankfully, the ones who stayed back no longer cared about anyone's legacy or second chances. So, she decided to take control of what was left of the resistance, so that she could continue the fight. That was the only thing she could do. She knew that she couldn't stop fighting. If she did, she would lose her will to live. Meanwhile, the Dark Lord and his Death Eaters were winning the war. The Muggleborns left within the resistance were surprised by that. They honestly expected the Muggles to be winning, especially with their modern weapons, but Daphne knew better. She knew that the Dark Lord wasn't to be underestimated. He was never to be underestimated. He might seem dismissive of the Muggles, but he was quite aware of the threats they posed, or he would have attacked them directly, instead of using their own weapons against them. Even against all the odds, the resistance continued to fight even though they kept losing members here and there. By the time she came up with her harebrained plan of traveling back in time, not many were left, and by the time she finished, she was the last living member of the resistance and the Dark Lord had almost taken over the world. Chapter 112, A Wrong Turn, 3. How did you know that I was from another world? The older Daphne asked curiously after she finally regained her bearings. She could already hazard a guess and she was pretty sure that she was right, but she simply wanted to make sure. You weren't the only one watching someone else's memories, the younger Daphne grumbled. Then she stared at older Daphne with a look of concern on her face. Are you sure you are all right? How are you even sane? The younger Daphne asked warily. The older Daphne cackled at that question, surprising the younger one. You aren't the only one to ask me that question and my answer will always be the same. The older Daphne trailed off with a toothy grin. Who says I am sane? She grinned, making the younger Daphne even more uncomfortable than before. The older Daphne was a bit annoyed over the fact that the younger Daphne got to watch her memories, but she decided not to make an issue of it. After all, turnabout is fair play. So, what now? The older Daphne asked with a scowl. She could once again attack the younger Daphne, but for whatever reason, she felt it won't be necessary anymore. Well, I am already disappearing, the younger said sullenly as she looked down at her hands, which were no longer completely opaque. The older Daphne looked at her with a bit of disbelief on her face. Your will, mind, and magic are much stronger than mine. The younger Daphne shrugged her shoulders with a shrug, but it was clear that she was barely restraining herself from crying. Look. I am sorry. The older Daphne tried to apologize, but the heated glare from younger Daphne's tear-filled eyes brought her to a screeching halt. Save it. The younger Daphne snapped at the older one. She felt bad for the older Daphne. She had seen the memories, so she knew that her life was really hard, but that didn't mean that she would simply roll over and die. She was only 14 years old. There was so much she hadn't seen. There was so much she never experienced. She wanted to live a long life and die of old age. Alas! Here she was, slowly fading away. So, she decided that her anger was justified. While younger Daphne was hatefully glaring at her older self was simply looking down at her feet. No matter what excuse she made, the older Daphne knew that she could never make it up to her younger self. After a couple of minutes of complete silence, the younger Daphne shuffled uncomfortably on her feet. You aren't going to let what happened in your world happen in my world, are you? She asked carefully. She always carried herself with pride and confidence, but the survival of her sister and her family was more important to her. To be honest, I don't know how to kill the Dark Lord. As you saw in my memories, the only ones who knew how to kill the man died before they could achieve anything, but I promise that I will do my best to protect them, the older Daphne vowed with a determined look on her face. She owed at least that much to her younger self, and she traveled back in time to stop such things from happening in the first place. Alas, knew that she couldn't face the Dark Lord. The man was way beyond her capabilities, but he was only a man. He didn't take over the wizarding world on his own. He had help. There were several Death Eaters or Death Eater sympathizers who made it possible for him to take over Wizarding Britain and at the same time, take over Muggle world. Though, there is something I can still do for you, the older Daphne said slowly. She wasn't sure if this would work or not as her ritual has already gone sideways, but it was at least worth a shot. It was a huge risk on her part, but she realized that she was far too jaded and bitter to act normally around her family. She didn't want to raise unnecessary questions. The younger Daphne seemed to perk up in interest at those words, so the older Daphne decided to carry on with her explanation. I already knew that I would end up inside my younger body, so I always wondered what would happen to my younger self. That was why I had to come up with a way to merge with my younger self in case I couldn't maintain my conscience anymore on my own, the older Daphne explained. Now, before you decide anything, I want to tell you that I am not sure if this would work as it is supposed to or not, as you already know that the ritual didn't work properly. Instead of traveling back in time, I ended up in a completely different timeline and world. So, think carefully. The older Daphne finally finished her explanation. The younger Daphne seemed to ponder her options for a bit before she finally nodded her head in consent. It wasn't like she had any other options. For survival, if she needed to merge with her older self, then that was exactly what she was going to do. Alright. What do I need to do? She asked curiously, looking somewhat unsure. You don't need to do much. You simply need to hold out your hand and I will take care of everything else. The older Daphne said as she stepped forward and extended her hand toward her younger self. The younger Daphne still remembered how viciously the old Daphne had attacked her, so she stared at the hand in trepidation for the next couple of seconds before she finally accepted the offered limb, but her eyes grew wide in fear when the older Daphne yanked her forward. The younger Daphne closed her eyes, expecting pain, but she felt something touch her forehead. She slowly opened her eyes to see what was exactly happening. A comforting feeling enveloped her body as she found her forehead touching with older Daphne's while she was being tightly hugged by older Daphne. The younger Daphne didn't know why, but she felt really comfortable in older Daphne's arms, so she simply decided to close her eyes and savor the feeling. Then all of a sudden, a spike of pain lanced through her mind, but before she could scream or do anything else, her whole world turned completely white. Some time later, the next time Daphne opened her eyes, she found a bit of sunlight filtering inside the room. It had worked. From what she could feel, the merging has worked. She could feel the familial bond her younger self had with her family members. Now she wasn't going to make a mess of herself while interacting with them. Daphne grabbed her wand from the nightstand and she immediately grimaced. The connection between herself and this wand wasn't as strong as the bond she had with her own wand in her own timeline. The wand was the same, but the wand she used had grown with her throughout the years, but this wand was still new and unused compared to her own wand. Daphne realized that she was going to miss her wand, and while the bond between herself and this wand wasn't that strong, she could still get used to this. She quickly removed the duvet and climbed down off her bed. She felt a cold breeze on her body and grimaced. She was dressed in a thin pair of pajamas, and in her timeline, she used to sleep with her body armor still on. She would need some time to get used to this. Shaking her head, she made her way toward the table. If she wanted to make a difference in this world, then she needed to start making preparations. She pulled out a notepad and grabbed a quill from the stand before finally sitting down. According to the memories of younger Daphne, she was about to start her 4th year, which meant that the Triwizard Tournament was going to take place this year and the Dark Lord would finally regain his body at the end of the Triwizard Tournament, next year. She dipped the quill in the ink pot and started to write down what she needed to do to change the future. 1. Get this weak body up to the mark. Her current body was frail and weak. She needed to fix that, and she already had a few rituals in her mind to achieve that. 2. Stop the Dark Lord from regaining his body. She scribbled down before quickly crossing the option. There were a couple of problems with this option. First of all, she had no idea how the Dark Lord regained his body or where he achieved that. So, she couldn't do anything to stop him from regaining his body. 3. Kill Lucius Malfoy. Lucius Malfoy was responsible for manipulating Cornelius Fudge and weakening the Ministry from the inside so that the Dark Lord could easily take over the Ministry. She knew she could kill the man, but she wasn't ready yet. With her current body, an assassination was out of option as she simply wasn't fit enough to break into the Malfoy manor. 4. Kill Draco Malfoy. Draco Malfoy was responsible for a lot of horrible things, but Daphne hated him with a passion for framing her family. Apparently, he was the one who was passing information to the resistance, but he had framed her family to save his own arse. He would most definitely die, but once again, she wasn't ready to kill him. 5. Kill Severus Snape. The man had backed up Draco when that little shite had framed her family, and he had also helped the Death Eaters to break into Hogwarts, which led to the fall of Hogwarts and Albus Dumbledore, but unfortunately, she couldn't kill that bastard any time soon. Killing him would send Dumbledore into a tizzy and he would leave no stone unturned to discover the killer. With a scowl on her face, she crossed the name from the list. 6. Kill Dolores Umbridge. Dolores Umbridge was probably the easiest target on the list, even though killing her would send Cornelius into a tizzy, but the man was incompetent as fuck and the bitch wasn't liked by anyone, even by her fellow pureblood fanatics, so there was a very small chance that anyone would try that hard to investigate her murder. The woman was responsible for creating the most horrible laws after the Dark Lord took over the ministry. A feral grin formed on Daphne's face. Yet, Dolores Umbridge was going to be the first casualty of the upcoming war and her death wasn't going to be quick or easy, Daphne decided. After all, Daphne had a lot of pent-up anger to deal with. Chapter 113, The Discoveries They Made. I hope you are not planning to turn my house into a prison or a dungeon, Jacqueline drawled dryly when she found that Harry was keeping 4 prisoners in her house. Well, no, not exactly. If my apartment was a bit bigger and not within any sort of civilization, then I would have used my own apartment to keep them, Harry answered unconvincingly, making Jacqueline roll her eyes at him. I might start charging you gold if you keep using my house as your personal dungeon, Jacqueline wondered aloud, and Harry gasped in horror at her words. You can't do that, he blurted out, looking horrified. He wanted to keep using her house as his prison. It was a nice place to hold prisoners. Who knows? Jacqueline mused with an amused grin on her face. All right. So, what are you going to do with them? Jacqueline asked as she pointed toward one of the prisoners. I am currently working on something which would keep her reined in. I will probably need a couple of days more to finish it, and when I am finally sure that she won't be able to stab me in the back, I will send her on her merry way so that she could work for me, Harry answered dismissively while staring at Rita Skeeter. I wasn't able to get to the Death Eaters, so I don't know who he belongs to, so I am going to keep him knocked out for the time being, Harry explained while looking at Dobby, the fanatical and crazy house elf. I found her quite intriguing, so I offered her to work for me. She accepted, Harry explained while looking at the female version of Moody. He didn't know her name yet, so he decided to call her Female Moody for the time being. Then why is she knocked out? Jacqueline asked as she raised her eyebrows at him. Well, she might have decided to work for me, but that doesn't mean I trust, and I couldn't have asked her to tag along. They would have asked me a lot of uncomfortable questions, Harry sighed while shaking his head. Jacqueline took another look at the witch and nodded her head in agreement. Harry was right, they would have asked a lot of uncomfortable questions. So, what about him? Jacqueline asked as she pointed toward the only wizard among the captives. Did he decide to join you too? Jacqueline asked curiously. I never asked him, Harry shrugged dismissively. He was the leader of the group, so I decided to capture him as I want to know who hired them, if possible. Harry raised his hand and stared at it before turning back toward Jacqueline, who was waiting for him to finish his sentence. And if not, then no skin off my shoulder, as he is going to be my legilimency practice subject, Harry finished with a feral grin on his face. Fuck. Have I ever told you that you can be fucking scary? Jacqueline blurted out with a grimace. You might have mentioned it sometimes, Harry commented airily before a grin formed on his face. By the way, there was something I was wondering after you told me about the fight. Jacqueline started to speak with a conflicted look on her face, and Harry simply urged her to continue speaking. You told me that you used the killing curse to kill some of them. I mean, did Voldemort use the killing curse to, kill your parents? Jacqueline finished nervously. For a bit Harry simply stared at Jacqueline before he started to chuckle while shaking his head. The killing curse is a weapon, Jackie. It's like hating the knife instead of hating the person who stabbed you, Harry said while chuckling, and Jacqueline simply inclined her head with a thoughtful look on her face before finally nodding her head. That makes sense, Jacqueline said while nodding her head. So, when are you going to wake her up? Jacqueline asked as she jerked her head toward the female Moody in an attempt to change the topic. As soon as I learn how to use sign language, Harry answered, making Jacqueline blink in confusion, but before she could voice her question, Harry decided to answer her unasked question. She is mute, Harry added, making Jacqueline nod her head in understanding. Time skip, a few hours later. Hymera Kuznetsov blinked in confusion as she regained her consciousness. At first, she didn't know where she was or what was happening to her, but then all of a sudden, everything started to come to her. She finally remembered that they were on a mission to kill Harry Potter, but the boy turned the tables on them. She remembered how she had decided to bail after realizing that she couldn't beat the boy and she would probably die. She remembered the boy catching up to her. She remembered accepting his offer and then nothing. No. That wasn't right. She remembered a golden glow surrounding Harry Potter's hands before she lost consciousness. Harry Potter had knocked her out. She almost growled out in anger, but that wasn't important, right? She immediately reached out toward her spare wand. She wasn't a fool. The boy had knocked her out, there was no way he would leave her primary wand on her. Good morning. So, you are finally up, someone spoke up from the side and Hymera immediately recognized the voice. Her head whipped in that direction only to find Harry Potter standing with his guardian, Jacqueline Harper. Hymera immediately shuffled on her feet and stepped away even though there was already a respectable amount of distance between herself and Harry. Calm down, I am not planning to attack you. Harry quickly made some gestures with his hands, making Hymera freeze in her tracks. The last time she met him, he didn't know sign language, she was pretty sure about that. She started to wonder how long she was knocked out. Where am I? Hymera asked using sign language. Using sign language with only a hand was hard, but she could manage it as sign language was the only way she could interact with anyone. You are in America. Harry answered her using gestures. And before you ask, it has been only a day since you were knocked out. Harry added as he could easily guess what she was planning to ask next. Hymera froze for a second time before she wordlessly scoffed at him. You learned how to use sign language within a day? I find that very hard to believe. Hymera gestured furiously. First of all, her new boss not only knocked her out without her consent, but now, he was even lying to her. I learned how to sign in an hour, but you don't need to believe me. After all, as long as I am paying you gold you don't have any problems, do you? Harry signed and Hymera was so tempted to scoff at his unbelievable claim, but she decided not to bother with it. The only thing that mattered to her was gold, and if the boy paid her to claim that he had the biggest dick in the world, then that was what she would do. Yes, as long as you keep paying me our predetermined amount of gold, I won't have any problem. Hymera gestured back. Harry simply grinned and pulled out a pouch and threw it over to her. Usually, she wouldn't have caught the pouch, but she realized that if Harry wanted to kill her then he could have easily killed her, so she caught the pouch with her hand and she immediately knew what was inside the pouch. She looked at Harry who was already signing with a grin on his face. 30 galleons, as decided. You may count them at your own leisure, but now that you work for me, tell me about yourself and start with your name. Harry finished gesturing, making Hymera freeze for a second. While a part of her mind wanted to count the gold, she decided to do that later. She wanted to know if he was a boy of his word or not. If she didn't find 30 galleons inside the pouch then she would know that she couldn't trust him, and if he could go against his word, then he could easily stab her in the back too, and in case there were 30 galleons in the pouch, then she would treat herself with a shopping trip. So, she dropped the pouch on the ground and started to write her name on the ground. When she was finally done, Harry called out her name aloud. Hymera Kuznetsov, Harry stated, and Hymera simply nodded her head. After that, she started to use sign language to tell him about herself. She was a Muggle born from Russia and she was a student in Koldovstoritz. Unfortunately, she was unable to finish school as when she was in her 6th year, some Muggles broke into her house and killed her parents before kidnapping her. Kidnapped you? Do you know who they were? Harry asked her with a curious look on his face. Now, Harry had a pretty good idea why Hymera looked like a female Moody. He wasn't certain, obviously, and that was why he asked. They called themselves Hydra and I don't want to talk about them. Hymera gestured furiously. She didn't want to talk about those monsters. Hydra, the word clicked inside Harry's mind. He had a perfect memory and clearly remembered the Ancient One mentioning Hydra and how she could have stopped them. Hydra. Tell me about them. Harry gestured and Hymera immediately shook her head. Not happening. Hymera gestured with a firm look on her face. Harry huffed in annoyance and pulled out another pouch from his robes and threw it toward her. She caught the pouch, and this pouch was much heavier than the last one, which made her eyes grow wide in surprise. 50 galleons and I will pay you more if I feel like it. Harry gestured and she stared at him suspiciously. She had tried to tell the others about Hydra, but everyone had scoffed at her until now. Harry Potter clearly had an interest in this Hydra, but he handed her 50 galleons and offered her to pay more. So, like any other well-adjusted individual, she started to tell him what happened to her after she was kidnapped by Hydra. Chapter 114, The Discoveries They Made. 2. Slash they were quick. Very quick, and they didn't even give me a chance to pull out my wand before they hit me with something, and whatever they hit me with paralyzed my body. Slash Hymera stopped for a second. Slash after they shot my parents, they put a black bag around my head and started to drag me. Slash talking about the death of her parents no longer bothered her, as what happened to her afterward was even more horrible. Slash while I was being dragged, I felt a sting in my arm, and moments later, I lost consciousness. The next time I woke up, I found myself inside some sort of vehicle, but my face was still covered so I didn't see anything. I felt another sting in my arm and I fell asleep again. Hymera stopped gesturing and was about to sit down on the ground, but Harry conjured her a chair with a jab of his wand. She gave him a thankful nod before sitting down. Her new boss conjured 2 more chairs and her new boss and his guardian also sat down. What happened to me after that wasn't pretty. Are you sure you want to hear all of that? Hymera asked, just to be sure. Sure. Go on. Harry simply urged her to go on, and Hymera internally grimaced. She never liked talking about this part, but her new boss might be the first one to believe her story. This wasn't the first time she was revealing her nightmares to someone, but nobody ever believed her. It grated her at the beginning. She still remembered breaking down and losing her will to live after they laughed at the horrors she went through. She had even tried to kill herself multiple times, but her damn powers kept her alive. She was forced to move on and make peace with her nightmares. Bringing back all of that up was going to be painful for her, but she knew that she could handle it, probably. Refusing now would be bad for her reputation, as she had already accepted the payment for it. The next time I woke up, I felt a searing pain in my stomach. Hymera gestured as she slowly raised her shirt to reveal her stomach. They were apparently putting a brand on me. Hymera signed as she pointed at the number 26 branded on her stomach before she lowered her hand and traced a long scar along her lower abdomen. At the same time, they were also cutting me open to remove my womb. I realized that later when I stopped having periods. Hymera signed with a stoic look on her face. She never cared about becoming a mother, at least not anymore, and she knew that she was going to be a really bad mother even if she tried. During the process, I once again lost my consciousness. Hymera added before lowering her shirt. She noticed that both her new boss and his guardian were watching her with stoic looks on their faces, but she could see anger in Jacqueline Harper's eyes, but her new boss's eyes were only filled with indifference. The next time I woke up was when the horrors started for real. I found myself inside a bone-chilling cold cell, completely naked, and there was another cell, right across the hall, but there was a naked boy of my age in that cell. He was branded with the number 25 on his stomach. Hymera revealed. At first, I was really embarrassed thanks to my nakedness, but my shame didn't last long, as there were other things we had to deal with. For example, there was no food. We had a tap in our cells for water, but no food. I tried to learn if he was a wizard or not, but apparently, he was a normal human. It was torturous to stay inside those cells. We couldn't sleep due to the chill or the hunger. Hymera paused a bit to take a deep breath. She didn't even bother to look at Harry or Jacqueline before she started to speak again. They kept us in our cells for a week, and the boy was barely alive while I was in much better condition, and that is when the PA system came alive. Hymera shuddered a bit. I still remembered those cold words. Thank you for participating in this experiment. I can easily notice that both of you are clearly starving, so, let me arrange a meal for you. He paused, and that is when our cell doors unlocked, surprising both of us, and the person using the PA system spoke again. Enjoy your meal. There was a hint of amusement in those words, and after that, the PA system went dead. I was the first one to come out of my cell, and after looking around, I didn't find any food. Boris. That was the boy's name, and he was the first one to understand what was happening, and as soon as he did, he came out of his cell and lunged at me. Hymera raised her fake hand. He bit off 2 of my fingers while he continued to cry and apologize to me. It took a lot of effort on my part, but I killed him. Due to starvation, he had become much weaker than me. Hymera slowly lowered her head. I didn't eat him. At least, not at the start. I looked around for an exit or any other cell, but that hall only had 2 cells. I starved for 5 more days before I finally gave in to my hunger. Hymera sullenly gestured and raised her head to see how her new boss and his guardian were taking her story. Jacqueline seemed to be torn between looking angry and sympathetic at the same time, while her new boss still had that stoic look on his face. She wondered how such a young boy could be so indifferent after hearing something like that. I am sorry you had to go through with all that. Harry apologized, and for the first time, Hymera felt that Harry felt genuinely sorry for her. You believe me? Hymera gestured furiously. The way he was acting made her feel like he truly believed her. The others who she had told about her kidnapping and the horror she experienced at the mercy of Hydra had either laughed at her or they had called her a liar. Yes, I do believe you. I don't know much about Hydra, but I have heard their name and I do know that they exist. Harry revealed. He felt really bad for Hymera. Nobody should have gone through that and he was sure that there was more to her story. Hymera narrowed her only eye on Harry in suspicion. She knew that Harry Potter was only 14 years old and powerful he might be, but he was still young and sheltered. This wasn't the first time she had told anyone about Hydra. After escaping from that hell, she had told the cops about Hydra, but instead of believing her, they had arrested her. After escaping from the cops, she had tried to appeal to the Aurors, but instead of helping her, they had laughed at her. She never told either of those parties what Hydra forced her to do for food, as there was a chance that they might declare her as a cannibalistic monster, but they should have at least tried to believe her. They should have at least tried to find out if she was telling the truth or not. After that, she gave up on the authorities and she had told the full story to some individuals, but none of them ever believed her. So, Hymera knew that Hydra wasn't a term someone could stumble upon out of the blue, especially not someone as young as Harry Potter. Where have you heard about them? Hymera asked with a look of suspicion marring her face. Whom? No, I am not going to tell you that, at least, not yet. I might feel sorry for what happened to you, but that doesn't mean that I will allow you to give me an order. Her new boss gestured coldly, but once again the look on his face was completely indifferent. Yes, he did feel bad for her, but it didn't mean that she was anything more than someone he wanted to use. Now, if you may please continue with the story. He gestured. Hymera wasn't pleased with the dismissal, but she knew that lashing out won't help her. Her new boss could easily beat her into the ground even if she was armed, but she wasn't armed right now. At least, she didn't believe that Harry Potter was a part of Hydra. With no other option, she simply resumed her story even though she really wanted to know how Harry learned about Hydra. Maybe they tried to kidnap him just like they had kidnapped me, but this time they failed. Hymera guessed internally. Yeah, it was plausible. Harry Potter was immensely powerful. It kind of boggled her mind, but it was highly plausible that Hydra had tried to kidnap him and her new boss had wiped the floor with them just like he did with her group. She winced a bit, but she was internally pleased. Anything bad happening to Hydra was good news to her. After I was finished with my meal, some sort of gas started to fill the hall and the cells and once again, I was knocked unconscious. Hymera revealed. The next time I woke up, I found myself in another cell, but this time, there were two differences. In my opposite cell, there was a girl instead of a boy and I had my with that, Hymera continued to tell them her morbid story. Chapter 115, The Garden They Lost, and I had my wand with me. Hymera revealed, surprising both Harry and Jacqueline. The two of them immediately started to wonder why they decided to return her wand all of a sudden, but they didn't have to wait long for the answer as Hymera started to sign again. I was so glad to have my wand back that I forgot the horrors I went through. Hymera smiled mirthlessly. I should have known better. Before I could celebrate any more, the PA system came online and my blood froze inside my veins at the words. Now that the two of you have eaten, let's move on to the next experiment. Number 26, you are a witch while number 30 is a normal human, so to even the ground, we gave her a gun. Your cells will open as soon as one of you dies. Good luck. With that, the PA system went offline, and the girl across my cell started to shoot at me while screaming madly. I tried to explain, I tried to stop her, but she kept shooting at me. Now that I think about it, I couldn't blame her for attacking me like that. I killed her too. I won't say it was self-defense. After all, I was so mad at her for trying to kill me. Hymera released a deep breath. The next moment, the cells opened up as the voice on the PA system had promised, but I no longer cared as all the events finally started to catch up to me and I started to vomit my guts out before I lost consciousness. The next time I woke up, I found myself strapped in a metal chair with a boy of my age sitting in front of me. I immediately recognized him as he was one of my classmates from Storitz. His name was Grigory Anastas and just like me, he was a Muggle-born too. He was also strapped to a metal chair just like me. Neither of us were wearing clothes, not that it mattered anymore. Hymera finished and her body shuddered at the memories of what happened next. I remember Grigory opening his mouth, trying to say something, but before he could say anything a man wearing a gas mask walked out of the shadows. The man was dressed in a full-body hazmat suit and he was wearing leather gloves on his hands. "Good morning to both of you. I am glad that the two of you decided to join me for the next experiment," the man said in a monotone as he stepped toward the table between me and Grigory. At that time, I thought that the man was probably mocking us, but now that I think about it, it was more like he was talking about the weather. "Why are you doing this to us?" I remember screaming at him as those were the first words that came to my mind, but instead of getting angry or anything, he simply shrugged his shoulders before he started to speak. "Like you have been told, all of this is an experiment and you were the most fitting test subjects." That was what he said before Grigory started to curse and scream at him. The man's next actions dissuaded me from trying anything. Hymera paused as she lost herself in her memories. "What did he do?" My new boss asked, snapping Hymera out of her trance. She didn't even notice that she had stopped gesturing. The man grabbed a plier from a nearby tray and pulled out one of Grigory's teeth. "Discipline is a must if you want to survive. A person without discipline is nothing more than an animal. If either of you speaks out of turn again, I will pull out one of your teeth." The man threatened us and I knew that he wasn't joking. Why would he when he had all the power? He returned the plier to the table and started to speak again. "We will be playing a small game. There is a die in this vial and both of you will be getting a chance to toss it on the table. First, let me explain the rules. If the number is 3, or lower than 3, then I will cut off something from the person who rolled the die, but they get to choose which part I cut and the choice needs to be made within 10 seconds or there will be punishment. If the number is 4, or greater than 4, then I will cut something from the person sitting across you and the person who rolled the die gets to choose what part I cut and once again, they only get 10 seconds or choose a horrible game. Don't you agree?" Hymera asked Harry and Jacqueline with a mirthless smile on her face. Jacqueline was feeling downright horrible. She was wondering how could someone do something like this while Harry was wondering why would someone do something like this without anything to gain. Now, Harry wasn't someone unfeeling so he was feeling bad for her too, but he really wanted to understand why would someone go to such lengths to torment others. It was clear that the man called all of it an experiment, which meant that he was trying to gain or learn something through them. Hymera took a deep breath before she started to speak again. "Now, as they say, ladies first," that was what he said, and placed the vial in one of my hands. Even with my hands strapped down to the chair, I could easily roll the dice on the table. I kept waiting and the man finally grew impatient and started to pick up the plier he had used to pull out Grigory's teeth, and I loved to have my teeth where they were, so I quickly tossed the die on the table. Much to my horror and elation, the die stopped at number 5. Hymera stopped and placed her hand over her eye patch. I couldn't bring myself to say something for the next 10 seconds, so I was punished. He pulled out my left eye. Hymera finished gesturing before once again tracing her eye patch with her hand. Except for my tongue, everything I am missing, and all the scars I have came from that game. Grigory wasn't happy that I had his finger cut off. Unfortunately, he didn't survive the game. Hymera grinned wickedly. Yet, she was missing an eye and an arm, but she had made peace with that and Grigory was asking for it when he told that man to burn her face. Once again, "I am sorry for making you remember all of that." Her new boss apologized and Hymera knew that he was being sincere. "What happened to you was horrible." Jacqueline said while shaking her head in anger. Hymera didn't know what to say to that. By the way, did you ever find out what they were actually trying to achieve? I mean they must have a reason, right? Harry asked curiously and Hymera nodded her head. They wanted to create a mutant with magic. Well, they succeeded and that is how I was able to escape from them. Hymera revealed with a grin, making Harry's eyes grow a bit wide at the revelation. Even Jacqueline seemed to react noticeably to her words and Hymera didn't mean their reactions. You are a mutant? Harry asked as he slowly stood up from his chair and his chair turned into dust. What can you do? What are your powers? Harry asked as he stepped forward, making Hymera realize that Harry probably knew a lot about mutants. The wizarding world had no idea what mutants were and she never revealed her mutant status to muggles as she didn't want to end up as someone's lab rat again. Yes, I have a healing factor, at least, that is what they called it. I heal. I heal very fast, but I don't think I am unkillable and my senses are also very sharp. That is how I was able to sense you inside the forest. How do you know about mutants? Hymera asked. While it might look like she might have given him too much information, in reality, she was simply playing safe. She didn't want Harry to think that she was hiding something. That's because I am mutant myself Harry revealed. He could have lied to hide or evade her question, but he didn't feel it necessary to hide that fact from someone who was just like him. A mutant who also has access to magic, and then there was another fact that when she revealed that she was a mutant too, he no longer saw her as an expendable pawn. In fact, she was much more than that, and Harry internally hooped inside his mind at the fact that he hit the jackpot by hiring her. You are a mutant too? What are your powers and how did you become a mutant? Hymera gestured furiously. While she was happy that she finally found a fellow mutant who had access to magic, she was somewhat suspicious too. Hydra experimented on her to make her trigger, so there is a chance that Harry Potter might have some sort of connection with Hydra. I will show you my powers later, and I triggered naturally. You don't have to worry, I don't have any connection with Hydra Harry revealed, surprising Hymera. Harry was a genius, so it wasn't hard to deduce that she was suspecting him. Now, before moving on, do you want me to fix your arm and tongue? Harry asked, making Hymera almost fall off her chair in surprise. Chapter 116, The Garden They Lost, 2. You can fix my arm and tongue? Hymera asked in disbelief. Yes Harry confirmed, and Hymera didn't know what to say. She had tried to get her arm and tongue fixed by healers, but it was impossible to regrow limbs or organs with conventional means of magic. Yes, if she had her arm and tongue, then the healers could have reattached them. So, do you want me to? Harry's question brought her out of her musings. Of course, I want to. Hymera immediately accepted the offer without missing a beat. Does this have something to do with your mutant powers? Hymera asked curiously. No, just good old magic. Harry signed back before pointing his wand at her mouth. Hymera opened her mouth. She didn't know if he needed to see the stub of her tongue or not, but she wasn't going to take any chances. Fair warning, this might hurt a bit, Harry said, only for Hymera to nod her head in understanding, and after getting her confirmation, he cast a spell to open the wound on the stub of her tongue. As soon as the blood started to flow out, he started to regrow her tongue. He noticed that it was a clean cut, so the one who removed her tongue did it with the proper tools and experience. It only took him a few seconds to completely regrow her tongue, and Hymera immediately started to move around her tongue, making unintelligible noises. Harry had to admit, growing a tongue was much more straightforward than he was expecting it to be. Take it easy, Harry urged her. Abyss-eared Hymera immediately gasped in shock. She didn't mean to speak, but she ended up speaking what was on her mind. It has been so long since she had a tongue, and having one now all of a sudden would require getting used to. And I have an if once again words flowed out of her mouth, and hearing her own voice after so many words felt really weird. What are you planning to do? Harry asked as he raised his brows at her. I want to see if my ealing orcs on ma yuangyu or not. Once again a string of mangle up words flowed out of her mouth. Harry simply gave her a look before he pulled out his own combat knife and handed it over to her. He was hoping that she wouldn't try to remove her newly healed tongue to test her healing factor. Thankfully, she simply poked her tongue out of her mouth before making a small cut on her tongue, and the cut healed itself within a second. That was your healing factor? Harry asked curiously, only for Hymera to nod her head. Yesh, Hymera admitted before she once again stuck her tongue out of her mouth and removed the tip of her tongue completely with the knife, making Jacqueline wince a bit, who was watching the duo interact in complete fascination. The tip of her tongue grew back on its own within a second. Greetable. Hymera breathed out with a grin on her face. Previously, she had tried to regrow her tongue with her healing factor by making a cut on the stub of her tongue, but it never worked. But now that Harry Potter had somehow managed to regrow her tongue, her healing factor was working on her tongue too. Now, she wouldn't need to get worried about someone removing her tongue, ever again. I am glad that you like it, Harry said with a grin on his face, and before Hymera could realize what she was doing, she had her arms wrapped around him. At first, Harry stiffed a bit but relaxed when he heard her grateful sobs. He could also hear her mumble thanks from time to time. After a whole minute, Hymera finally released him from her tight grip. Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me, Hymera thanked him with a grateful look on her face as she kept wiping off her tears with her sleeves. She was also sporting a 1000-watt smile, as this was probably the happiest day of her life in years. Don't mention it, by the way, how did you lose your tongue? If you don't mind me asking, Harry asked curiously, as she never told him how she lost her tongue. It's right. They antied me to chost Mossack Islandly, but I always ended up oising my spelsh under Risher, so they moved my ongyo to all the problem. Hymera explained with a shrug, and Harry had to admit, it was kind of extreme, but what else could he expect from an organization who were promoting cannibalism? I do have some more questions for you, but before that, let me heal your hand, Harry said as he pointed toward her fake arm. Hymera was a mutant with a super strong healing factor, so there was no way that Harry wasn't going to try to win her over. He wanted her to trust him, and to earn the trust of someone as paranoid as Hymera, he would need to play all of his cards right. Hymera was so excited that she didn't even bother to say anything after hearing his words. She simply rolled over her right sleeve before she started to remove her fake arm, which was strapped around the stump of her right forearm. As soon as she was done, she extended the stump toward Harry, so that he could start working on her arm. All right. This might hurt, as I would need to open your wound, Harry warned before casting the first spell to open her wound. Hymera didn't even flinch in the slightest as he opened her wound. It was pretty clear that she was quite used to pain, and after he was finally done opening her wound, he started to regrow her arm. Yes, Harry was using fleshcraft to regrow her arm, but it was someone else in his place, then they would have taken more time, as they would need to take measurements for her other arm to keep her new arm symmetrical to her original arm, but Harry was doing the calculations inside his mind on the go thanks to his beyond genius level intellect. It took him almost a minute to completely regrow her arm along with the fingers. Regrowing her tongue was much more simpler than regrowing her arm. As for her arm, he had to regrow her bones, tendons, cartilage, different types of muscles, and finally, skin, along with all of its complex layers if wanted her arm to be close to the original, and anything less than perfect wasn't acceptable for Harry. How does it feel? Harry asked as she started to move her wrist and fingers while staring at her arm in complete awe. Amazing! Hymera breathed out while inspecting her arm with a lost look on her face, and Harry simply smiled at her words. I would have healed your eye too, but an eye is more complex than an arm, and I want to avoid any unnecessary risks, but I am sure that I can heal your eye within a couple of months, Harry added while giving her an apologetic look. Od. I auntie know what to I. Uhav already won, so you fr me. I mera uznit so will be turn ally trafel to you. Ek. You auntie even eed to pay me. I'll work fru, completely re. Hymera growled out with a determined look on her face, and while it was somewhat challenging for Harry to understand her mangled words, he was able to understand what she was trying to convey. You don't need to work for free, and here Harry pulled out another pouch filled with 50 galleons and handed it over to her, but before Hymera could say anything, Harry started to speak again. I am a man of my word. I said, I will pay you for your services, and that is what I will do, and the pouch is for the story. Additional 50 galleons, Harry explained with a grin, and when Hymera looked like she was about to protest again, Harry cut her off before she could get anything out of her mouth. I simply healed your arm and your tongue because I wanted to. Think of them as an incentive. Harry waved his arm with a grin, making Hymera nod her head. Good, now that all of that is out of our way, let's get on to business. Here is the magical contract I have prepared, Harry said as he pulled out a rolled-up parchment from his robes and handed it over to Hymera. Thanks to his research into the binding contract fiasco, he knew how to create a magical contract. Hymera didn't say anything as she accepted the contract. She had realized that arguing with her new boss was useless and he would simply have his way. To be honest, with him being so nice to her still felt completely surreal to her, but she wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. She opened the contract and started to read it over. It was pretty simple. She will be working for Harry Potter, and she won't be allowed to reveal any of his secrets even if she leaves his employment, and he will be paying her 30 galleons per month for her services. Bonuses excluded. This was a lot better than she was expecting it to be. So when she was done reading the contract, she simply looked up and stared at Harry with a smile. She didn't remember the last time she had smiled like this. Here do I IGN? Hymera asked, and Harry simply pointed to the spot where she needed to sign with a quill. Time skip, half an hour later. Well, were you planning to go easy on her like that, or did you already know that she was a mutant? Jacqueline asked after Hymera finally left for the Alley of Druids to buy herself some new clothes and armor along with a magical eye with the gold she received from Harry. She never had the gold to buy herself a magical eye, and since Harry couldn't fix her eye right away, she decided to get herself a magical eye, as missing an eye was severely hampering her combat skills. I didn't know she was a mutant, but there is a reason why I kept contracts so simple and flexible. I didn't want to make her feel I am oppressing her. I wanted to make her feel that I am the good guy and she wouldn't regret staying with me, Harry explained in an indifferent tone. Her being a mutant definitely changed some things, but she is now much more than a simple expendable pawn, Harry mused coldly. You know, you are fucking devious, Jacqueline declared as she poked his shoulder with a pout on her face. I know, but I am not inhuman. The people. Hydra is going to pay for what they did to her, Harry said as he tightly clenched his fist and intense amounts of magic started to roll over from him. Count me in. Jacqueline declared. There was no way she was going to sit out from a fight again. So, what now? Should I ask Morcy to bring out the wizard? Jacqueline asked only to get a nod from Harry. Jacqueline called Morcy and asked her to bring the captive wizard. The house elf nodded before popping away, and moments later, she returned with the captive wizard in tow. She dropped the wizard before popping away. Harry simply waved his hand and raised the man in the air before casting the Renervate charm on him. The man awoke with a gasp and his body was petrified before he could even realize what was happening to him. When a flash of realization finally appeared in his eyes, Harry started to speak. Good morning, I hope you had a nice nap. Harry smiled at him politely, but Hans Muller knew that the boy was anything but polite. He knew that the boy was hiding his true nature behind the facade of a 14-year-old boy. You see, I have never done this before, so it might hurt you here and there. Okay, let's try this. Legilimens, Harry said, and Hans immediately felt a mental probe brush against his metal barriers. That sounded so fucking wrong, Jacqueline mumbled with a grimace, but her words went ignored by both Harry and Hans, as Hans would openly admit that he wasn't having a good day if he could speak or even scream. The first probe was gentle, but the second probe simply broke through his shields like it was made of a wet paper bag, and his memories started to flash in front of his eyes. At first, Harry simply inspected his shields before he decided to maul through them. He did have the power to do that, and thanks to his beyond genius level intellect he started to get the hang of the spell. Legilimency was an extremely difficult art, but Harry was already getting so good at the spell within moments, which should have taken anyone else in his place months to achieve. Harry felt a bit sad when he found that Hans had no idea about who placed the contract. His group simply decided to accept the contract from a secretive organization known as the Guild. If Harry was being honest, the Guild interested him, and that is when a terrible, but amazing, and brilliant idea popped into his mind. Chapter 117, The Garden They Lost, 3. Malfoy Manor, Wiltshire, England, August 20, 1994. Lucius Malfoy was not a happy man. Harry Potter survived, and according to his sources within the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the whole mercenary group he hired had been wiped out, which meant someone had interfered. He was sure that it wasn't someone from the light side, or they wouldn't have killed the mercenaries. The light side kind of rolled like that. Not only that, Avery somehow managed to get his arse handed to him by a 14-year-old. He knew that Avery wasn't the best fighter out there, but he still didn't expect the man to lose to a 14-year-old. That was simply pathetic. Avery was supposed to go to Azkaban for life for using the Cruciatus Curse, but they were able to cut off his sentence to 5 years of imprisonment. Sometimes, he couldn't believe how easy it was to manipulate the Wizengamot. Thankfully, Avery wasn't killed. Well, what else could he expect from the vaunted boy who lived? The next paragon of light. Not that he was complaining in the first place, as he wouldn't be alive right now if the light side wasn't choking down on morals at every step. That was also the reason why they were winning the war, and they would have won if the Dark Lord didn't become obsessed with the Potters and the Longbottoms for whatever reason. Though that wasn't the last of it. Surprise! Surprise! The Dark Lord went to kill the Potters without any backup and got himself killed instead. Lucius groaned as his gaze focused on the dark mark on his left arm, which was getting darker with each passing day. He had heard some whispers from some of his former associates, saying that the Dark Lord is coming back. The Dark Lord always said that he was immortal, and to be honest, Lucius never believed him much on that, but if the Dark Lord was really coming back, then Lucius knew that he was in a world of pain. First of all, he needed to come up with a very good excuse for repealing the Dark Lord and his cause after his death, and then he needed to come up with a very good excuse for losing the Dark Lord's precious diary. Lucius didn't know what exactly the diary was, but he knew that it was very important to the Dark Lord, and the diary could supposedly give a person access to the legendary Chamber of Secrets, though he wasn't sure about the last one, as the diary disappeared into obscurity after he handed it over to the youngest Weasley brat. The diary was given to his father by the Dark Lord for safekeeping, and before his father passed away, he passed on the diary to him for safekeeping. He remembered his father asking him to keep the diary safe at any cost, as the diary was very important to the Dark Lord, and now that he had lost the diary without much to show for it, he knew that there would be retribution. Lucius grabbed the fire whiskey bottle from his desk and poured himself a generous drink before chugging down at one go before his gaze once again focused on the daily profit resting on the table. He growled at the moving picture of Harry Potter and snarled in rage as he tossed the glass toward the wall. The glass shattered. Not that Lucius cared. His sources inside Gringotts had informed him that Harry Potter had been blood adopted into the Black family by Sirius Black even though the boy had decided to keep his original name. It wasn't much of a consolation since Sirius Black was still alive, but at least, the boy won't be able to occupy the Black seat in Wizengamot. Maybe, Cornelius could help him with something. Though he would need to convince the minister to interfere in family matters before anything else. It won't be easy as Cornelius was a coward at heart, but if he could convince his undersecretary to play along with him, which wasn't going to be hard, then he might be able to get Cornelius to act. Cornelius, that boy has too much political power with the Potter and Black headships under his control. I am afraid that he might create an imbalance in our society, especially with him being not educated in our traditions and culture. Lucius mused in amusement. If he pitched the idea like that then he could already see Cornelius agreeing with him. Lucius decided to pour himself another drink to celebrate, but then he remembered that he had tossed the glass. His gaze focused on the glass shards lying on the floor and decided to get it cleaned. Dob. Lucius came to a halt when all of a sudden, he remembered that his house elf was missing too. That was when he finally lost his composure and started to curse like a sailor. X Mansion, Salem Center, New York, August 21, 1994. Charles Xavier slowly took off his Cerebro helmet and placed it on the stand in front of him with a somber look on his face. His prized machine turned itself off, but right now, Cerebro wasn't one of his immediate concerns. For the last couple of weeks, he was trying to locate the newly triggered mutants, but all of his efforts have turned out to be fruitless. He was almost certain the newly triggered mutant was a fellow telepath, an extremely strong one at that, and that is exactly where the problem was. He wanted to find the mutant and bring him to his school so that he could provide guidance. With great power comes great responsibilities, but right now, that mutant didn't even know how to handle their powers, and that terrified Charles quite a bit. That mutant was probably a ticking time bomb for all he knew. Though that wasn't the end of his problems. This mutant could use their powers to hide from him, and Charles wasn't amused by that fact, not in the slightest. How was he supposed to keep an eye on his fellow mutants if they could hide from him? How was he supposed to stop his fellow mutants from harming the normals if they could hide from him? How was he supposed to guide his fellow mutants to help and protect humanity if they could hide from him? Eric could also hide from him, and with this new mutant being able to hide from him didn't fill him with any confidence. Who knew what this new mutant could be doing? This new mutant was an extremely strong telepath, and Charles knew that such power could be tempting. Charles could wrap a person's mind to his whims with enough time, Jean could too, and he suspected this mutant could too. With that kind of power in their hands, this mutant could very well walk down a dark path. Charles released a sigh before shaking his head as he started to leave the Cerebro chamber. He will try again tomorrow and maybe, he will have some luck then. Headmaster's office, Hogwarts. Albus slowly pulled himself out of his pensieve and leaned back in his chair with a contemplative look on his face. He was able to acquire the memory of the fight from the Weasley twins, and after reviewing the memory for the 5th time, Albus was sure that Harry was holding himself back for whatever reason. He had noticed the signs all over the place. Anyone else in his place would have failed to notice the signs, but the signs were obvious for someone like him, especially when he was holding himself back in a similar fashion all the time. After all, he didn't want to kill anyone by accident. That was the reason why he never fought the Death Eaters with everything he had, or he might have killed them all, but Harry was only 14 years old and he was already too good for someone of his age, so why was he holding himself back in the fight? Avery wasn't the best fighter, but he was still quite good with a wand. It should have been simply impossible for Harry to beat the man. Albus stroked his chin with a thoughtful frown on his face. He was glad that Harry had jumped to protect the Weasleys without wanting anything in return, but he couldn't help but feel that there was something more to it. The DMLE was trying to suppress the news about the bodies found inside the forest, but no matter how tight Amelia was sailing her ship, it was simply impossible to hide something like that from him. Was Harry somehow connected to the bodies found inside the forest? The Aurors had inspected his wand and they didn't find anything illegal or dark on there, but wands could be easily cleaned, and if it was Tom residing in Harry's body, then he could easily clean the wand, but Tom wouldn't have tried to save the Weasleys if he wasn't playing the long game. Things weren't looking good. If Tom has taken over Harry's body, then they have already lost the war. At least, he would have his answers during the Triwizard tournament, and he was also able to acquire a teacher for this session, so everything wasn't bad. With a sigh, he entered the pensive again to view the rest of the memory. He was pretty amused by the way Harry treated Barty Crouch. He never liked the man, especially after the war. No matter how much Albus tried, he couldn't blame the boy for treating the man like that. Though a pained look appeared on his face as his gaze landed on the lying figure of Ginevra Weasley. Currently, she was getting treated at St. Mungo's and everything was looking good. Her spinal cord was damaged due to the elongated exposure to the Cruciatus curse, but according to the healers, the damage wasn't too much. Albus was helping the Weasleys with his own gold. He knew that he would need all the gold he owned as soon as the war broke out, but he knew that he wouldn't be able to live with himself if he didn't help out young Ginevra. Chapter 118, The Garden They Lost, 4. Jacqueline's Pad, April 21, 1994. Phew. That was a lot more complicated than I was expecting it to be. Though, it's finally done, Harry commented internally as he was practically glowing on the outside. He finally finished his own dark mark, and Harry had to admit, it was quite satisfying. He looked down at the finished model of his dark mark, and if anyone was around him then they would have felt the pride practically rolling off of him. So, how is your dark mark different from Voldemort's dark mark? Lily asked curiously, as was also interested in his dark mark. As soon as she regained a body, she would be getting herself her Hadrian's mark, or maybe, she could do that after spending some steamy time with her son. Then all of a sudden something clicked inside her mind. By the way, what are you going to call your mark? After all, you can't call it the dark mark. Lily added her second question hurriedly before Harry could start speaking. Harry, who was about to answer her first question, came to a screeching halt. I haven't thought of a name, he admitted lamely. Maybe, I will be able to come up with something, and meanwhile, let me tell you about the functions, Harry suggested, making Lily chuckle as she eagerly agreed to learn about the mark. She did see what he was doing through his eyes, but wherever he was doing it too fast for her to understand anything. First of all, I have created 3 different versions of the mark. They look exactly the same, but they would work differently, Harry said before he placed the tip of his finger on the parchment in front of him, and moments later, another mark formed on the parchment, but just like Harry had said, the 2 marks on the parchment looked exactly the same. I will use this for the people I trust the most. Jacqueline will be getting this mark, and Brittany too if she wants. Any forceful means of extracting information won't work on anyone with this mark on their body. This mark will also allow them to draw magic from me in case of an emergency, and this function would also allow them to learn mystic arts, Harry explained with a grin. The amount of magic they could draw from him was minuscule compared to his own reserves, but even that minuscule amount would give anyone with this mark a tremendous amount of magical boost. Really, wouldn't that cut off your own reserves? Lily asked with a hint of confusion in her voice. Harry chuckled at her question. Haha. No. The amount they could draw from me would be so small that I probably wouldn't even notice them drawing magic from me if I am not specifically paying attention to the draw, Harry explained, easing her concern. I also want to see if my reactor starts producing more magic to compensate for the draw, Harry added after a small pause, making Lily nod her head in understanding. Now that her concerns were sated, Harry decided to continue with their initial topic. Harry placed his finger on another empty spot over the parchment, and moments later, another mark appeared on the parchment. I am going to use this mark on people like Chimera. People who trust me and are unlikely to betray me, but I simply don't know them enough to trust them completely. This mark will simply prevent anyone from divulging any information regarding me or my team willingly or unwillingly, and this mark doesn't give anyone access to my magic, Harry explained, and Lily nodded her head in understanding. And finally, Harry grinned fearfully as he placed his finger on the first mark, which was already on the parchment before he even started explaining. This is one I am going to use on people I do not trust, but I want them to work for me. Just like the last one, this mark will also prevent anyone from divulging any information regarding me or my team willingly or unwillingly, and this mark will also give me access to their thoughts. As soon as someone starts planning something, which might hurt me or mine, I will know, and the others will be dissuaded from thinking along the same lines, Harry finished coldly with the same feral grin present on his face. Well then. Congratulations! Lily exclaimed proudly at her son, and Harry simply hummed contently. By the way, all 3 versions of my mark have the same functions as the dark mark, Harry pointed out, and Lily hummed appraisingly at his words. Voldemort might be an evil bastard, but I can't ignore his skills, Harry mused, and Lily completely agreed with her son on that. Voldemort was obviously a prodigy when it came to magic, he could have done so much good. Alas, it didn't turn out like that. Hadrian, there was something I have been meaning to ask you. Lily spoke up slowly after a few moments of silence, and after getting a mental equivalent of a nod from Harry, she decided to continue speaking. I was wondering why you decided to attack Hydra. I mean, I understand why you are angry and all that, but aren't you? I don't know, rushing it a bit, Lily asked, though her voice at the end turned somewhat sheepish. Usually, she would have tried to dissuade him, but she was trying to do better, so she simply wanted to understand why Harry decided to attack them. There are mainly 3 reasons for that. First of all, they are monsters and what they did to Hymera was really horrible. Hymera is going to be one of mine and she deserves some revenge. Secondly, I want to make her more indebted to me. I want to make her think that I am the only one she could trust with her life, and finally, I want the information they have. If they can really create mutants through whatever means, I want to have that information. I may not use it ever, but it would be much better to have it rather than not having it when I need it, Harry explained with a shrug. I see. I am sure Hymera and Jacqueline would be pleased, and I think it would be a good experience for you too. Lily nodded her head in satisfaction. Yes, you are right on both accounts, and I have also made up my mind on what to call my mark, Harry said, and Lily immediately perked up at his words. I have decided to call my mark Sigil of the Lost, Harry explained with a grin, making Lily incline her head with a confused look on her face. I would admit, Sigil of the Lost sounds pretty good, but why that specifically? Lily asked in confusion. All will be revealed in good time, Harry answered while grinning mirthfully, making Lily pout childishly inside his mind. Meanwhile, the mirthful look on Harry's face turned into a look of pride as he continued to stare at the Sigil of the Lost. Image here. Time skip, the next day. You are saying that you are going to let me go? Rita asked in a hopeful tone. She had been knocked out for almost 4 days and now the demon said that he was going to let her go. Rita couldn't help but swoon with joy as she already started to plan her revenge. She wasn't going to let this humiliation go unanswered, and while she was kind of useless when it came to fighting, she wouldn't need to fight if she wanted to destroy him. After all, a quill was mightier than a wand in some instances. Yes, but not so soon. You see, I have designed something recently. A mark to signify that you are one of mine, Harry revealed with a grin, and Rita may not be the sharpest tool in the shed, but she could already guess where this was going and she didn't like it even in the slightest. Jacqueline, you have been beside me from the start, so I believe that you should receive my mark before anyone else, Harry said as he stared at Jacqueline, who beamed proudly as she stepped forward and revealed her right arm to him. Harry accepted her right arm and placed the tip of his wand just above her right wrist, and moments later, the Sigil of the Lost appeared just above her wrist. Harry had already told her everything about the mark before getting both Hymera and Rita, so she already knew what she was getting into. Jacqueline stared at the Sigil of the Lost in complete awe as she rubbed her hand over the mark while grinning like a loon. You have created your own dark mark. Rita gasped in shock as her face lost all color. Her whole body started to tremble in fear. That was rude. Mine is better than the dark mark, Harry retorted with a look of mock outrage as the mark on Jacqueline's wrist became invisible. My mark can disappear when it is not needed, Harry added with a grin while staring at Rita. He added this feature in the morning. After that, he finally turned toward Hymera, who seemed to be staring at the spot on Jacqueline's arm where the Sigil of the Lost was only a few moments ago. Hymera. Harry began to speak, but before he could say anything else, Hymera cut him off. Harry wanted to tell her that by accepting the mark, she won't be able to betray him willingly or unwillingly, but Hymera had other opinions. I want one too, Hymera said with a determined look on her face. Are you sure? I mean, there will be no going back after this, Harry pointed out, and Hymera simply nodded her head confidently as she stepped forward and offered her right arm to him. Harry nodded his head as he accepted her arm and placed the tip of his wand just above her wrist, and moments later, the Sigil of the Lost appeared on her arm too. Hymera smiled wickedly as she stepped back while staring at the mark on her hand. She might have rushed it a bit, but after everything Harry has done for her, she wanted to follow him for the rest of her life. After that, Harry finally turned toward Rita. Your arm please, Harry requested politely, but Rita already knew that it was anything but a request. She offered him her arm while trembling like a leaf, and Harry clutched her hand tightly, making her whimper. Your mark is a bit special, Rita. You see, I know that you want revenge. You want to make me pay, but that mark will inform me of your treachery, and believe me, Rita, you don't want to know what I would do to you, Harry warned her coldly, making her whimper again. He placed the tip of his wand on her arm, and moments later, the Sigil of the Lost appeared on his arm, and just like Jacqueline's and Hymera's mark, her mark also disappeared after a few seconds. All right, Rita, now you are one of my own. I know our first meeting wasn't ideal, nor was I happy with the way our meeting progressed, but I promise you, I will treat you as one of my own from now on as long as you don't try anything stupid, Harry promised softly with an honest smile on his face. Rita didn't know if he was lying or not, but his words did sound genuine. Even after that, she didn't stop thinking about her revenge. She decided that it won't hurt her to wait and see. She didn't want to earn his wrath if what he said about the mark on her arm was true. Meanwhile, Harry simply stepped backward and clasped his hands behind his back in a dramatic fashion. From today onwards, we will be known as the Lost Garden, Harry revealed proudly as his eyes started to glow and the air started to shimmer as he started to flex a bit of his magic. Chapter 119, The Champions Chosen, I. Time skip, October 31, 1994. Bombarda Maxima. Daphne snarled and the spell struck the stone statue, shattering it into a million pieces. She hunched down with her hands on her knees while breathing heavily. Fuck this body! Daphne cursed inside her mind. She hated how weak her body was. With this body, she wasn't confident that she could even assassinate Dolores Umbridge, who was probably one of the easiest targets on her list. It took her another minute to finally catch her breath, and as soon as she was done, she straightened up and her surroundings started to change. The rubble littered inside the room disappeared and moments later, 10 stone statues appeared, surrounding her from every direction. The stone statues were carrying various types of weapons. Some of them were carrying long swords, while some of them were carrying spears, and finally, a couple of statues were carrying shields and swords. The statues started to move as they pointed their weapons at Daphne, and that was the signal she was waiting for as she started to move too. She turned toward one of the statues carrying a shield and a sword, and lightning bolts shot out of the tip of her wand. The lightning bolts struck the statue and the stone statue was shattered into multiple pieces. Even though her target was down, she didn't wait to celebrate as the other statues were already over her. She rolled over the ground just before a spear and a long sword smashed the place where she was standing. She came to a stop and she immediately turned around and cast a blasting hex at the statue carrying the spear. The torso of the statue exploded and the lower half of the statue slumped down on the floor. After that, Daphne continued to dispatch the rest of the statues using various types of spells, and by the time she finally dispatched the last statue, she was barely standing on her feet. When Daphne was finally done, she simply slumped down on the floor before rolling over onto her back while breathing heavily. She was both magically and physically exhausted. Now, I can at least dispatch 2 batches without getting hit, Daphne sighed tiredly, even though she wasn't satisfied with the results. The statues couldn't use magic even though they were quite fast and strong, while all of her enemies were going to have magic. Daphne knew that she needed to improve, and she needed to improve a lot if she really wanted to make a difference this time around. A mirthless chuckle escaped her lips when she remembered that this wasn't even her world. There were so many differences that Daphne was sure that this was a completely different world, not just a different timeline. After all, she was pretty sure that there was no Captain America in her world. After realizing that this was probably a different timeline or a different world altogether, she had started to research history, as history was the best way to know if this was simply a different timeline or if this was a completely different world altogether. Magical history was practically the same, but since she already knew that this world wasn't her world, she decided to branch out to the Muggle world. During the war, she had come to learn a lot of Muggle history, so she was sure that if there was any difference, she would easily notice them, and that is when she came across Captain America. The man was basically a super soldier who led the Allied forces to victory in World War II. Daphne didn't know how to react to that. After all, the Muggles didn't have any super soldiers in their world, and even in the future they didn't have any, and after looking through various books, she was sure that Captain America wasn't simply propaganda. Then there were mentions of mutants here and there. She wasn't able to find anything concrete about them, but from what she was able to find, they were supposed to have some sort of powers. For now, she simply decided not to think about them much, as she wasn't even sure if they really existed or not. At least, the history of the magical world is almost the same, but I am not sure if Harry Potter's name will be entered in the tournament or not, with my first 3 years being so different. Daphne sighed tiredly as she raised her hand and stared at it. Thankfully, I will have my answer tonight, Daphne smiled softly. The champions were going to be selected tonight, but once again she wasn't sure if Harry Potter's name was going to be entered into the tournament or not. First of all, there haven't been any signs of Voldemort in the last 3 years. While working with the Resistance, she had come to learn that the Dark Lord had been trying to return for quite a few years. During their first year, the man was possessing Quirinus Quirrell, who was trying to steal the Philosopher's Stone to regain a body, which was being kept hidden on the 3rd floor, and he would have succeeded if it wasn't for 3 first years. Why Dumbledore was keeping the damn thing in the school filled with so many children was simply beyond her. Then in their 2nd year, Voldemort was trying to regain a body by possessing a student, and he was also responsible for petrifications, but beyond that, she didn't know anything, as the members of the Resistance who knew about the whole incident never trusted her. She huffed in annoyance as she slowly sat up. She was still quite tired, and she really wanted to take a nap, but she knew she couldn't, as she needed to attend her classes or others would start asking uncomfortable questions. For the time being, she knew that she needed to play it nice with the other Slytherins. Then finally, Alastor Moody wasn't their Dada professor this year, instead it was a guy named Lang Mo. She didn't know anything about the man, but she was sure that Barty Crouch Jr. wasn't masquerading as Lang Mo. She had been watching the man very closely, but the man wasn't drinking anything every hour to maintain his disguise. She knew that in her timeline Barty Crouch Jr. was using Polyjuice Potion to disguise himself as Alastor Moody, so that was the first thing she looked for. Now there was always a chance that Lang Mo might be a literal Death Eater, but she couldn't act without any sort of confirmation. Speaking of Slytherins, for the last 2 months, she had been holding herself back from killing the ferret. It was really hard to act normally around everyone else, but she was managing somehow. At least, she didn't break down after returning to Hogwarts, like she did after meeting her parents and her sister for the first time after coming here. She was able to lie her way through by saying she had a bad nightmare, but it was a close thing. Daphne closed her eyes in concentration, and moments later, the room transformed into a massive bathroom. I don't know what I would have done if I didn't know about the room of requirement. Daphne grinned as she quickly stripped out of her clothes before jumping into the massive tub. After swimming for a bit, she made her way toward one of the edges before she finally sat down inside the tub with her back resting at the edge of the tub. Thankfully, she was able to learn about the room of requirement and how to use it from some of the Resistance members. I will also need to finish all the preparations for the ritual. Daphne groaned. Tonight was All Hallows Eve, and rituals would give her better results if she performed them tonight. She already knew the ritual she wanted to perform tonight, now she only needed to finish all of her preparations. She took a deep breath before she started to take a look at her body. She was already developing muscles, and while she never had any fat around her belly, her stomach was much more toned right now. I am going to be a bombshell in the future, she giggled in mad glee while checking herself out. She was looking extremely good, especially with all the scars missing from her body. Topmost tower, Ilvermorny. Harry stared at the moonlit sky with a gentle smile on his face. It's about time he was broken out of his musing by his mom. Harry nodded his head in agreement. She was right. It was almost time. The last 2 months have been quite hectic for him with everything going on. He simply raised his hands in the air and started to rotate them in the air, creating a portal. As soon as the portal stabilized, Harry stepped through the portal and arrived at the top of one of the hills near Hogwarts. The portal closed behind him as Harry stared at the massive castle. He pursed his lips before he looked toward the Hogsmeade village. Even at this time, the village was quite busy. Well, it was All Hallows Eve, so it was to be expected. The village was decorated in regard to All Hallows Eve and not Halloween. Harry nodded his head in satisfaction. He wasn't a magical supremacist, but he didn't like the fact that their traditions and culture were being replaced by Muggle tradition and culture. After all, Halloween wasn't their festival. Maybe, he could do something about that after Voldemort and his merry band of fanatics were finally dealt with. Harry shook his head before he finally turned back toward Hogwarts. He took a deep breath as he rolled his shoulders before he finally jumped off the hill. Chapter 120, The Champions Chosen, 2. Harry didn't even descend for more than a few meters before his form started to shift, and moments later, Harry was completely gone, only to be replaced by a massive jet-black harpy eagle with green emerald-like eyes. The harpy eagle flapped its wings, creating a gust of wind as it started to take its way toward Hogwarts. Everything looks so beautiful from up here, Lily breathed out as she continued to watch everything through Harry's eyes. Harry had to admit, his mom was right. True, he wasn't a big fan of Hogwarts, but his reasons didn't have anything to do with the location or the scenery. He knew that his mom wasn't much of a flyer, so he wasn't surprised that his mom was enjoying this sight for the first time. The moonlit scenery in front of their eyes was simply breathtaking. Why didn't you try to become an animagus? Harry asked curiously, making Lily huff in annoyance. Not everyone is as talented as you, my son, Lily chastised her son in an amused tone. While Lily never had the talent to become an animagus, she never felt she was missing too much, but for Harry, animagus transformation was just like any other everyday spell. He simply needed to make up his mind that he wanted to become an animagus and that was it. It was last month when Harry decided to become an animagus so that he could break into Hogwarts. Most establishments lacked animagus wards and Lily had told Harry that the marauders were never caught, so Harry was somewhat sure that Hogwarts didn't have animagus wards, and even if they did have animagus wards, he wasn't worried in the slightest as he was confident that he could escape if he was ever discovered. "Come on, follow my directions, I will guide you to the Great Hall." With that, Lily started to guide him toward the Great Hall. "Here we are," Harry muttered, sounding somewhat pleased with himself as he slipped inside Hogwarts through one of the holes for the owls. It was somewhat difficult for him, especially with his size, but he somehow managed and landed on one of the rafters. "Oh! Looks like everyone is already here," Harry gushed while looking around. He had to admit, the Great Hall was much better than the dining hall back in Ilvermorny. Hogwarts seemed to be living up to the medieval castle part. "That greasy bastard is Severus Snape?" Harry asked his mom, who simply hummed absently as she was still busy looking around the Great Hall. It has been years since she left Hogwarts, and returning here after so many years was bringing back old memories. "Phileas still looks the same, and Minerva as well." "Minerva," Lily mumbled as her gaze focused on the high table. "That's Igor Karkaroff. Looks like you need to be a murderer and are at pissed to become successful in the wizarding world." Lily scowled unhappily. "He cut a deal with the Ministry and sold out his fellow butt buddies so that he could walk free. His kind is the worst of the worst," Harry growled in agreement. He hated Voldemort and the Death Eaters, but Igor Karkaroff had a special place on his hit list. The man was a turncoat and Harry hated them with a passion no matter which side they were on. "Then, that would be Olympe Maxime." "Wow, she is big," Harry commented, sounding somewhat surprised. "Either of her parents must have been giants." "Same for that man," Harry commented as his gaze focused on a giant man sitting at one of the edges of the high table. "Yeah, that's Hagrid," Lily added helpfully, and Harry simply gave her a mental equivalent of a nod as he continued to look around the Great Hall. Durmstrang students were sitting with the Slytherins, not that he expected anything else as Durmstrang only accepted pure-blood students. No surprise, someone like Karkaroff was their High Master. Beauxbatons students were sitting with the Ravenclaws, and to be honest, Harry didn't know what to think about the Beauxbatons students, except for calling them haughty and arrogant. The Goblet of Fire was still on fire, and from the looks of it, there was still some time before the champions were going to be selected, so he simply decided to wait and look around. He would have loved to snatch back his father's invisibility cloak from Dumbledore, but that was not why he was here, and breaking into Hogwarts might have been easy, but he was sure that breaking into Dumbledore's office won't be as easy as that. Then there was a fact that there was a chance that the invisibility cloak wasn't in his office. The dinner finally came to an end and Dumbledore stood up from his throne before he clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. He started to blabber about how the wait was finally over and it was finally time for the champions to be chosen. The flames around the goblet dimmed a bit along with the light inside the Great Hall before the flames flared up and a small parchment was spewed out of the goblet. Dumbledore grabbed the parchment from the air and announced the name. The first champion was Victor Krum from Durmstrang, and Igor was so pleased that it looked like he would cream his pants. After that, the lights inside the hall dimmed again along with the flames around the goblet. The flames flared again and another parchment was spewed out of the goblet. The second champion was Fleur Delacour from Beauxbatons, but unlike the last time, everyone wasn't pleased with her selection. The boys seemed to be cheering roaringly while the girls seemed to be scowling unhappily. "Is that Avila?" his mom inquired, only for Harry to mentally hum in agreement. The hall dimmed for the third time and another parchment was spewed out of the flames. The third and final champion was Cedric Diggory from Hogwarts, and he belonged to the Hufflepuff house. Lily chortled at the faces Slytherins, Gryffindors, and Ravenclaws were making. "This is hilarious." Even though they are clapping, their displeasure is clearly visible on their faces. Lily continued to laugh. "Even the other head of the houses don't look pleased at all," Harry agreed. All of them looked happy, but none of them were happy in real, and Pomona Sprout, the head of the Hufflepuff house, looked like Christmas had come early for her and her house. After that, Dumbledore started to give him a finishing speech when all of a sudden, the hall dimmed, making his pause, and a fourth parchment was spewed out of the goblet. Harry didn't need his beyond-level genius to guess whose name was written on the parchment. The whole hall became silent, waiting in anticipation, and when Dumbledore finally opened the parchment, he paled. Harry had to admit, the man was a really good actor. "Gentlemen, I believe we should retreat to some private place." Dumbledore suggested, and while the other headmasters looked like they were going to argue, they decided to reluctantly follow him when Bagman and Crouch Sr. agreed with his suggestion. Dumbledore simply dismissed the students before he started to make his way toward the antechamber where the rest of the champions were already gathered. Most of the students looked quite disappointed at the fact that they didn't get to know what was happening, but they still started to leave the Great Hall. Harry cast a disillusionment charm on himself. The feat would have been impossible for any animagus in their animal form, but Harry wasn't everyone else. He quickly followed Dumbledore and the others into the antechamber, but he decided to keep his distance from the others, so he decided to land on one of the lamps outside the antechamber. What is the meaning of this, Dumbledore? 4 champions! Igor Karkaroff roared in anger from the inside, making Harry scowl unhappily. Yes, Dumbledore, I also want to know what is the meaning of this, Olympe Maxime said primly with a weird accent, and Harry also ended up chuckling when he heard her say Dumbledore. Please, even I don't have the answers. Harry Potter is not a student of our school, which means someone else entered his name in this tournament. Dumbledore tried to placate his fellow headmasters in a tired tone, and it seemed to be working. I am telling you, it was Black. Only he could have done something like this, and the boy is James Potter's son. What else do you expect from him? I am sure that Black and Potter came up with this together. Someone drawled, but Harry could feel that the man was barely holding himself back from screaming in rage. That's Severus. I guess. He never grew up. Lily sighed in disappointment, and Harry simply decided to store that information inside his head for the time being. Severus, Sirius isn't responsible for this. You can't blame everything on him. Dumbledore sighed softly, but his voice was drowned when Minerva started to scold Severus, and after that, everyone started to say something at the same time, but all of a sudden everyone stopped when a loud bang was heard from inside the chamber. Everybody calm down. Screaming at each other won't help. Dumbledore stated firmly, and mumbles of apologies followed. Harry had to admit, the man had quite a presence. But what do we do now? Bagman asked nervously. First of all, I will need to inform Sirius and his guardian and tell them about this development, Dumbledore stated, and everyone seemed to ponder his words. So, what about the tournament? Crouch Sr. asked. I think we should postpone everything for 2 days, Dumbledore suggested, and Bagman was the first one to agree with that. After that, Harry didn't need to listen anymore. He flapped his wings and flew off the lamp as decided to return to Ilvermorny. Chapter 121, A Wicked Future Foretold. Astronomy Tower, Hogwarts, October 31st, 1994. Albus Dumbledore pulled out a lemon drop from his pocket and popped it inside his mouth as he stared at the horizon with a jovial smile on his face. All of his plans were finally coming along, and Albus couldn't help but feel satisfied over that fact. Yes, Sirius was quite angry at him for this development, but Albus was sure that Sirius would eventually get over his anger. He believed that Sirius was simply lashing out at the only visible target, and Albus was completely fine with that. Albus had also talked with the president of MCU and explained the situation to the man. The president wasn't happy with their lack of security or their conduct, but there wasn't much the man could do now, so he had agreed to host him and Sirius tomorrow. Sirius insisted that he wanted to tag along, and Albus didn't mind since there was a chance that he might need Sirius' help to convince Harry to return to Hogwarts for the tournament, even though he knew that he could be very convincing himself. Then all of a sudden, Albus was broken out of his reverie when he heard some footsteps. He started to wonder who it was at this time of the night. He smiled warily when he recognized the person. Good evening, Sybil, how are you? Albus asked the obviously tipsy woman with his patented grandfatherly smile on his face. Albus. The woman blinked in confusion. Where am I, Albus? I remember heading toward the 7th, but now I am here. The woman slurred out as she stumbled into the astronomy tower. Albus barely stopped himself from palming his face. Sometimes, he wondered why he ever bothered to hire this woman, and this was one of those times, but then, he remembered that the woman in front of him had delivered the most important prophecy of this century. This is the astronomy tower, my dear Sybil, Albus answered the woman, making the woman blink ghoulishly behind her extremely thick glasses. Then I might have made a wrong turn, or was this where I was supposed to be? Sybil asked herself, looking somewhat puzzled, but before either Sybil or Albus could say anything else, Sybil perked up, losing all of her drunkenness. Her posture was completely straight and inhuman, and Albus felt dread well up in his stomach, as this wasn't the first time he was witnessing this scenario. He had seen Sybil act like this back in 1980 when she gave her first true prophecy. The child of magic is born from light. Tempered by dark, he was blinded by might. He shall strive for a better life. Only for him to thrive. For those of dark and light shall bow down in front of his might. None shall question his right. For he commands Archmage's might. Cybele's voice boomed as she delivered the prophecy, and now that she was finally done, she broke out of her trance and blinked in confusion. I think I should start heading back. I am not feeling so good, Cybele mumbled before she turned around and started to leave the astronomy tower, leaving behind Albus on his own to ponder the prophecy she just delivered. No. No. This can't be happening right now. Albus grimaced in horror as the meaning behind Cybele's words finally registered in his mind. No. I need to revisit the memory, Albus decided internally, looking somewhat pale as he started to rush toward his office. All of his previous joy was gone, only to be replaced by worry and fear. Director's Office, DMLE, October 31, 1994. So, our suspicions were right? Amelia asked, but nobody present inside the room bothered to answer as everyone knew that it was a rhetorical question. Amelia leaned back in her comfortable chair as she pinched the bridge of her nose in frustration. So, what do we do now? We don't even know what the fuck he is planning. Amelia growled, looking annoyed. We could always try to bug his office. Connie suggested weakly. She had never visited the headmaster's office herself, but she knew that Dumbledore's office was filled with various types of trinkets and portraits. They could easily place something subtle inside his office to spy on him. Magic was quite handy just like that. It could have worked if it wasn't for his blasted songbird. From what I remember, that damn bird never leaves his office, Alastair growled as he slammed his fist on the table. What about you, Saul? Do you know a way to get about a phoenix? Amelia asked, only for the man to shrug his shoulders dismissively. I know how to ward any place against phoenixes, but I don't know how to hide from them, Saul said while shaking his head. Well, that route is fucked, I suppose, Amelia grimaced. By the way, Tonks, did you find anything suspicious about Lang Mo? Amelia asked as she turned toward Tonks, who was sipping cola. No. He is a good professor, but I don't think he is a Death Eater. He is simply too generic, Tonks answered thoughtfully. But you are still going to keep an eye on him. Most of the time, most generic people could turn out to be the culprit, Amelia explained gravely. What about Snape and Karkaroff? We know Snape was a Death Eater no matter what Dumbledore says, and we all know about Karkaroff, Gawain asked all of a sudden. I will bet my money on Karkaroff. I don't know what he is up to as I wasn't able to follow him all the time, but he looked kind of jumpy. He would act most suspiciously when nobody is around him. Like ready to fight or flight, Tonks explained stiffly. And as for Snape, he is a complete arsehole. I still wonder why he is still a professor. He should be rotting in Azkaban for the way he acts for the rest of his life, Tonks growled as she sipped her cola furiously. Unfortunately, being an arsehole is not a punishable crime, or most of the Dark and Light faction members would be rotting in Azkaban. Amelia waved her hand dismissively. Keep an eye on both of them for the time being, and for the sake of Merlin, don't get caught, Amelia pleaded, only for Tonks to nod her head. I am trying, boss, but it is hard. Trying to act like a 14-year-old is a pain in the arse, and your niece is a social butterfly. That is making my job even harder for me, Tonks complained. She hated the fact that she was whining, but sometimes a whine was earned, and when she had to masquerade as a hormonal 14-year-old, a whine was deserved, she decided. Don't start with that, Amelia rubbed her temples. Susan has been throwing quite a tantrum. Just a few more days. We need to have someone on the inside to know what is going on, especially with Albus preventing us from making a move, Amelia sighed tiredly. It has been 3 days since Tonks was attending Hogwarts while masquerading as Susan Bones, and Amelia wanted Tonks to be there in Hogwarts for the next few days to know what was happening in there. Albus acted like Hogwarts was his own personal domain, and with all the political clout he possessed, he probably owned Hogwarts. Fine. Tonks agreed grumpily before grabbing the small bag from the table, which was filled with unhealthy fast food and various types of carbonated drinks. In return for her hard work, she was getting fast food and carbonated drinks from them. I think I should be heading back. That Abbott girl knows nothing about personal space and boundaries, Tonks griped unhappily as she made her way toward the normal-looking cupboard beside the bookshelf in Amelia's office. Tonks arrived in front of the cupboard and tapped the cupboard with her wand. The intricate designs on the cupboard lit up and Tonks yanked the cupboard open. By that time, she was already morphed into Susan Bones. Take care, guys. After wishing everyone well, she stepped into the cupboard and the doors closed behind her with a snap. The cupboard might look normal, but it was a vanishing cabinet, donated for the cause by Saul Croker. The other pair was inside Tonk's room, and while they expected smuggling a vanishing cabinet inside Hogwarts would be hard, it was easy as fuck. After that, the gathering was soon dismissed as there wasn't much to do at this point. They simply lacked the information to do anything, and that is exactly what they were trying to solve. Headmaster's Office, Ilvermorny, November 1, 1994. Harry arrived outside the headmaster's office and knocked on the door. He already knew why he had been called to the headmaster's office. After all, he was right there when his not-so-real name was spewed out of the goblet of fire. He heard Carlson's voice from the inside, telling him to enter. Harry pushed the door open, only to find that the room was filled with a lot of people. Harry already knew that Albus was planning to contact his godfather, so he wasn't surprised by the man's presence, but he was surprised by the presence of a few people. First of all, the president of MCU was here, and not only that, Cornelius Fudge, the most illuminating Britain's Minister of Magic, was also here. Thankfully, his pet frog wasn't here, but there were a few people inside the room Harry didn't recognize, and from their robes, Harry deduced that they were probably Aurors. A couple of Aurors for each leader. Jacqueline was also here, which wasn't surprising. Oh, and Bagman and Crouch Sr. were also present, but Harry didn't consider either of them to be important. So, what's up? Harry asked curiously as he looked around the people gathered inside the headmaster's office. Chapter 122, Ready Set Action, I. Headmaster's Office, Ilvermorny. Albus Dumbledore carefully watched Harry as Bagman explained to the boy why all of them were here. Sirius pitched in from time to time whenever it looked like Harry was about to snap at Bagman. Yesterday, Albus never got to sleep much as he was busy reviewing the prophecy delivered by Sybil with the help of his pensieve in extreme detail. He kept scrutinizing every bit of the prophecy again and again for hours until the prophecy finally started to make any sense to him. Albus was almost certain that the child mentioned in the prophecy was Harry. He knew that Harry was quite powerful even when he was only a year old, and he had recently seen the memory of his duel against Avery, so there was no doubt in his mind that Harry was quite powerful, and after a lot of consideration, Albus realized that Harry Potter was probably the most fitting candidate for the prophecy. He was born from James and Lily, and both of them were avid light supporters, and during that fateful night, Harry was tainted by Voldemort's soul. Not only that, but later, Harry was tainted by darkness itself when he killed the Dursleys in cold blood. Right now, Harry was striving to have a better life, and the rest of the prophecy was kind of self-explanatory, especially with the first part of the prophecy, but there was something Albus failed to understand. No matter how much he tried, he couldn't understand the meaning of the last line of the prophecy. Archmage's might. What was Archmage's might? He didn't know, but he knew that he needed to find out as quickly as possible, as according to the prophecy, Harry was going to reshape the wizarding world, and Albus couldn't have that. Since yesterday, Albus was also wondering if the power the Dark Lord knows not referred to Archmage's might. If that was really the case, then Albus was going to have a really hard time trying to stop Harry, but Albus had no intentions of backing down from the challenge. Then all of a sudden, Albus was broken out of his musings when Harry finally started to speak. So, let me get this straight. Apparently, my name came out of the Goblet of Fire, and now I have to participate in this tournament or lose my magic. Harry asked as he looked around, making gestures with his hands. Yes, that is exactly what we are trying to say, Barty Crouch Sr. huffed gruffly while giving Harry an annoyed look. He still remembered how the boy had humiliated him in front of the Aurors. Harry, I know how you feel. I don't think anyone is happy by forcing you into this, but you need to participate in the tournament or you will lose your magic. Sirius stepped forward and placed a hand over Harry's shoulder while speaking with a solemn look on his face. Harry hummed as he looked around the room. Bagman was obviously happy over this development for whatever reason. Barty Crouch looked annoyed. Sirius was quite angry with this whole situation, but he seemed to have accepted the situation as there wasn't much he could do right now. Cornelius Fudge looked nervous and giddy at the same time for whatever reason, while the president of MCU simply looked troubled. No, I don't believe I will, Harry answered softly with his gaze fixed on Albus. His words took everyone by surprise except for Jacqueline, as she already had an idea of how Harry was going to react. She knew that Harry hated being forced into anything, and then there was the fact that Harry wanted nothing to do with the tournament. Albus Dumbledore, who was looking really contemplative for whatever reason, reeled back in disbelief. Barty Crouch was the first one to regain his bearings after Harry dropped the bomb. I don't think you understand the situation, boy, Barty growled with an annoyed look on his face. This was his chance to get back at the boy, but before he could continue his tirade, Harry decided to cut him off. It's not me who doesn't understand the situation, Crouch. It's all of you who don't understand, Harry spoke out in an amused tone while shaking his head. What was the name written on the parchment that came out of the goblet? Harry asked. Harry, what are you? Sirius began to speak with a confused look on his face, but before he could continue, Harry interrupted him. Just humor me, Harry insisted, and it was Bagman who decided to answer his question. Harry Potter. That was the name written on the parchment, Bagman answered unsurely. He wasn't sure where Harry was going with this, but he didn't see any problem with answering Harry's question. See. There you have it. The name written on the parchment was Harry Potter, but my name is not Harry Potter. There is no way someone can bind me with an unbreakable contract with a name that's not even my own, Harry revealed with a toothy grin on his face, making everyone stare at him blankly. Everyone inside the room except for Jacqueline were equally confused, and while Albus was confused too, he felt his heart drop into his stomach. But you are Harry Potter, Cornelius Fudge blurted out dumbly, and Harry simply shrugged at him. That is what you people decided to call me, but that is not my real name. Harry simply rolled his shoulders with a "what can you do" look on his face. So, you are saying that Harry Potter isn't your real name? The president of MCU asked with a conflicting look on his face. Half of him was glad over the fact that a 14-year-old wasn't going to be forced into a gladiatorial sport, no matter how big of a celebrity the boy was, while the other part of his mind wanted to get the boy arrested for using a fake name. Alas, even a below-average lawyer would be able to get the case thrown out of the court within minutes. After all, by the time the boy appeared in the public, everyone already knew him by the name Harry Potter, and the boy was only a year and a half old when he became famous. Clearly, someone else was to be blamed here for making him famous by a fake name, and the boy simply took advantage of him. No matter how much he tried, he had to admit that the boy was quite cunning. Yes, that is exactly what I am saying, Harry confirmed while nodding his head. Meanwhile, Sirius, who was still standing by Harry's side, didn't know what to do. A part of him wanted him to cheer in joy as Harry didn't need to participate in the tournament, which meant that the ones who entered his name in the tournament failed. Then another part of him wanted to congratulate Harry for pulling such a hilarious prank, and then another part of him was sulking. That part wanted to ask why Harry decided not to trust him, but he quickly crushed the feeling as he realized that they haven't known each other for long. You know, I could have you arrested for using a fake name. The president threatened, wanting to scare the boy to make him realize that he was on thin ice, but instead of looking afraid, the boy simply nodded his head. Sirius wanted to protest on Harry's behalf, but Harry simply raised his hand to stop him. I know, but I know you won't. Arresting me won't get you anywhere. So, I welcome you to try, Harry said cockily, making the president grit his teeth. The boy was right. He could have the boy arrested right here, right now, but it won't get him anywhere. But regardless of that, he was so tempted to ask his aurors to arrest the boy, but it won't help his image in the slightest, and if he wanted to win the election, again, he needed to keep maintaining his good image. Meanwhile, Albus was having a hard time wrapping his head around the big reveal. He couldn't believe all of his plans were failing in such a manner. No. He realized he couldn't have that. He couldn't have his plans failing at this stage. Keeping an eye on Harry became more important after the second prophecy was delivered. Albus decided that he needed to get a hold of this situation before this could derail any more. Harry, I can understand what you are saying, but do you really want to risk your magic on something as whimsical as that? The Goblet of Fire is an old artifact. We do not know how it works, or what are the limits of the goblet, and so many people know you by the name Harry Potter. Magic is all about intent, Harry, and the one who entered your name believed you to be Harry Potter, then there is a chance that the contract might have formed regardless of the fact that Harry Potter is your real name or not, Albus explained, trying to act as a caring grandfather, and it seemed to be working as Harry seemed to clearly considering his words. I can see the logic in your words, Headmaster Dumbledore, but I am still going to stand by my decision, Harry answered with a determined look on his face, making Albus grimace. Harry, you have no idea what is at stake here. Albus began to speak with a pleading look on his face, but Harry cut him off. While Albus was almost certain that contract wouldn't work with a fake, he didn't want to take any chances, as if Harry lost his magic, then Voldemort would win. Maybe, I don't, but there are a few things I know for certain. There are people back in Britain who want to make me dance to their tunes, but that is not going to happen. My decision is final. I am not going to participate, Harry stated firmly, and Albus felt his shoulders slump down at those words. It was clear that words weren't going to work, which meant he needed to use other means to get Harry back to Britain, but for now, he would accept his defeat and leave, though there was something nagging at the back of his mind. By the way, what is your real name? Just to sate this old man's curiosity, Albus asked softly. He wanted to know Harry's real name in case he ever needed it. Harry simply smirked at the elderly man. That's for me to know and you to find out, Harry said slyly, making Albus almost snap at him, right then and there. Chapter 123, The Enemy Who Planned, 2. Riddle House, Little Hangleton, November 1, 1994. Wormtail, a small baby-like figure wrapped in a black sheet, hissed furiously, but the figure was definitely not a baby, especially not when the figure was sporting red and scaly wrinkled skin. The figure also possessed some distinguished features, such as snake-like nostrils and slit-like eyes. The figure was also holding a bone-white wand in its tiny disfigured hands, and anyone who fought in the last war would have recognized the figure as widely feared you-know-who. Another man entered the room with a potion vial in his hand with a fearful look on his face. "The man, here is your potion, my lord," the man whispered fearfully as he kneeled before the demented form of Lord Voldemort and held out the potion vial. "What are you waiting for, you fool?" The demented figure snarled shrilly, making the whimpering flail around and almost dropped the potion vial. The man carefully stood up and uncorked the potion vial before holding the potion vial in front of the demented figure's body. The figure grabbed the potion vial with its free hand and tipped the potion vial over its mouth so that it could consume the potion. Lord Voldemort hated his current body. He hated the fact that he required the assistance of someone like Peter Pettigrew to maintain his current form. It was degrading and humiliating on so many levels, but what other choice did he have? His homunculus body was weak and he required a special potion consisting of unicorn blood and Nagini's venom every few hours to even maintain this form, but what option did he have? He needed a rudimentary body if wanted to regain his original form. After losing his body back in Halloween 1981, he fled to the forest in Albania and decided to hide there. He was hoping for his followers to come looking for him in the following years, but none of them came. He degraded himself by possessing animals for the following years, but then all of a sudden, an opportunity presented itself to him when a wizard named Quirinus Quirrell arrived in the forest, and Voldemort reluctantly decided to let the opportunity pass by. Yes, he was desperate to regain a body, but partial possession wasn't ideal from his perspective, nor did he have any reason to reveal his continued existence to the rest of the world, especially when he had nothing to gain for it. First of all, Harry Potter was missing, and then there was always a chance that his weak form might be discovered by the others. A year and a half later, he came across Nagini and he immediately knew that there was something special about her. So, he decided to possess her, and he was surprised to find that her body was able to hold up without any degradation due to possession. After 2 more years, another opportunity presented itself when none other than Peter Pettigrew came looking for him in Albania. If he was being honest, he wasn't expecting someone like Pettigrew to come looking for him. After all, Pettigrew was a coward, but he was not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. With Pettigrew's help, he was able to create a homunculus for himself. He knew it wasn't ideal, but it was his only course of action. He expected Nagini to die after he left her body, but once again, she surprised him by staying alive. After that, he started to plan what his next move was going to be, but then all of a sudden, Pettigrew returned with a woman named Bertha Horkins. The woman turned out to be a treasure trove of knowledge, so he decided to use her to create another Horcrux as an honor. From her, he learned that Barty Crouch Jr. was still alive and was being held under the Imperious Curse by his own father. He immediately decided to free Barty, as Barty was one of his most fanatical followers, and from Pettigrew, he knew that Barty never deserted him. From Bertha Horkins, he also got to learn about the Triwizard Tournament, and then he started to plan how to use the tournament to kidnap Harry Potter, and then use the boy to regain his body before disposing of the bane of his existence. Freeing Barty Jr. from his father's control wasn't that hard, as they simply showed up in his house and Crouch Sr. wasn't able to resist them. After that, he put Crouch Sr. under the Imperious Curse and ordered him to act as if everything was normal and nothing was amiss. Voldemort realized that if he wanted his plan to succeed, then he would need someone inside Hogwarts, so he tasked Barty Jr. to infiltrate Hogwarts and enter Harry Potter's name inside the goblet after confounding the goblet to think that there were 4 schools in the tournament. Thankfully, Barty Jr. was an extremely gifted wizard, so he succeeded. His plan worked and Harry Potter's name was selected as the 4th champion. Now, he simply had to wait and he would once again rise in power. "Have you heard anything from Barty?" Voldemort asked as he narrowed his slitted eyes at Pettigrew. He hated the man with his very being, but credit where credit's due. The cowardly man who looked much like Animagus's counterpart came looking for him even though it was for his own selfish reasons, but the man still came looking for him while the others have deserted him. Last night, Barty had reported that today Dumbledore will be visiting America with the rest of the organizers to get Harry Potter, but Barty was yet to report anything after that. And no, my lord, Pettigrew stuttered out fearfully and Voldemort's nostril flared in annoyance. He would have loved to curse Pettigrew stupid if he had another follower at hand. Voldemort opened his mouth to say something, but he froze when he felt someone cross the wards, but the wards didn't trigger. Only 3 people knew he was here and one of them was present right in front of him, which meant that it was either Barty Jr. or it was Barty Sr. He didn't need to wait long before a figure finally arrived outside the room and knocked on the door. Since the door was slightly ajar, Voldemort immediately recognized the man at the door. For whatever reason, Barty Sr. was here, which meant something was wrong. "Why are you here?" Voldemort asked carefully and Pettigrew whimpered again, much to his distaste. Harry Potter had refused to return to Britain and participate in the tournament, Barty Sr. answered after he entered the room and kneeled in front of Voldemort. At his words, Voldemort's eyes grew wide in surprise. Technically, it was good news as the boy would lose his magic as a consequence of not participating, but he couldn't be sure, especially when he didn't know much about the Goblet of Fire. Yes, the goblet was supposed to bind all participants with unbreakable contacts, but it was Barty Jr. who entered the name, so he wasn't sure who would be bound. And Dumbledore accepted. "I am not sure that Dumbledore would allow the boy to lose his magic," Voldemort spoke slowly. Voldemort knew that Dumbledore knew the whole prophecy and he was also sure that Harry Potter was the child of the prophecy, so there was no way that Dumbledore would allow his only hope to lose his magic. After all, according to the prophecy, only Harry Potter could defeat him. He wasn't happy, but he knew that he couldn't force the issue when the boy presented a valid reason to refuse his inclusion in the tournament, Barty Sr. answered, making Voldemort raise his non-existent eyebrows at the man. What valid reason could the boy possibly have for refusing his inclusion? "What is this so-called valid reason the boy gave?" Voldemort asked in an irritated tone as he was getting really impatient. "He said that Harry Potter is not his real name and even the goblet won't be able to bind him with an unbreakable contract with a fake name," Barty Sr. revealed, and Voldemort almost choked at those words. He immediately started to consider the implications of this development inside his mind. If what the boy said is true, then there is no way that the goblet would be able to bind him with an unbreakable contract, but how is this even possible? I clearly remember that Mudblood calling him Harry while begging. Was she knowingly using a fake name in case I tried something like this? Voldemort considered inside his mind before quickly shaking his head in denial. No. He refused to believe that a Mudblood could be that sharp, but then all of a sudden, he froze. Lily Potter wasn't just any other Mudblood, she was extremely sharp and cunning. Voldemort knew that Harry Potter didn't beat him, but it was Lily Potter who invoked something with her death and rendered him bodiless. So, he couldn't dismiss the idea that she used a fake name to knowingly fool him and everyone else in case someone tried something like this. This realization wasn't hard for him to swallow. The Mudblood had fooled him twice, which was an extremely bitter pill to swallow. He felt a towering rage bubble inside of him, but thankfully, he had 2 targets right in front of his eyes for his ire to be pointed at. Crucio! Voldemort snarled as he pointed his wand at Barty Crouch Sr. Chapter 124, Ready Set Action, 2. Headmaster's Office, Ilvermorny. "Harry. I can still call you that, right?" Carlson asked with a winning smile on his face as he leaned forward on the table. Harry simply shrugged his shoulders dismissively as he didn't mind if everyone kept calling him Harry. In fact, he would prefer that instead of every random person using his given name to call him. "All right, Harry, you know you are putting me in a tough spot, aren't you?" Carlson asked with a deep frown. The winning smile on his face was gone, only to be replaced by a deep frown. "Yes, I know, and that is why I am here, talking with you. I could have disappeared into the wind without telling you anything," Harry explained coolly, making Carlson openly scowl at Harry. "I have never seen you act like this." "Masterful deceit, I would say," Carlson growled bitterly. If he wasn't being put into this spot by Harry, then he would have praised the boy, but he was being put into a very difficult spot by Harry, and if the boy went forward with his plan then it would be Carlson who would be raked over the coals. "Were you really hiding your true personality all this time?" Carlson asked warily, making Harry smile softly. "You are a smart man, Headmaster, I am sure that you have already worked it out," Harry stated softly, making Carlson scowl. Now, he was sure that Harry was hiding his true personality all this time, As for why? That is quite a complicated question with no simple answer. The best answer I can give you is that I wasn't strong enough to make a stand, but that's not the case anymore. Harry added as he could guess the next question Carlson was planning to ask. Carlson narrowed his eyes on Harry. Was the boy reading his mind? No, that wasn't the case, Carlson decided. He realized that the boy was simply able to guess what he was thinking. So, now that he had the answer to the question he wanted to ask, he decided to ponder those words. After pondering for a few seconds, he finally realized what the boy was trying to say, and to be honest, he was completely bewildered. He couldn't believe what Harry was trying to say. You seriously can't expect me to believe? Carlson scoffed at Harry, but he froze when Harry released a tiny fraction of his magic, making Carlson choke under the pressure. Everyone was not equal when it came to their magical prowess, Carlson was quite aware of this fact, but to feel this amount of power rolling off from a 14-year-old surprised him to his very core. Satisfied with the desired effect, Harry finally reeled back his magic, and the thick pressure disappeared. Do you believe me now? Harry asked coolly. He wasn't worried about Carlson telling the others about this, as he knew very well what type of man Carlson Kent was. The man was basically an opportunist. Carlson gulped nervously before nodding his head. How about this? You help me and I help you back in return, Harry suggested, and Carlson simply raised his eyebrows in question as he didn't trust his voice to not tremble. I know you are planning to run for president, I can help you there. If I support your campaign, you know you will win, Harry offered, and Carlson had to admit, that was exactly what he wanted. And I am not asking you to do something illegal. I simply need you to sign these papers so that I can take my eagles early, and I am completely fine if you don't. Having your permission will simply make the whole process much smoother for me, Harry said as he slid the papers toward Carlson. Carlson pursed his lips as he started to ponder his options. Harry was right. Even without his permission, Harry would be able to take his eagles early, and nobody would be able to stop him, as the department wasn't under anyone's purview except for the Minister of Education, but with his permission, the process will become much faster and smoother for Harry. Either way, Harry will have the right to carry his wand even if decides to discontinue his education after taking his eagles. Now, he could either help Harry and get his support during the election campaign, or he could sit on the sidelines. After pondering for a couple of minutes, Carlson finally grabbed the papers and picked up the quill from the table. He knew that there would be some political backlash. He knew that the Britishers weren't going to give up so easily. After all, this was probably their best opportunity to get Harry Potter back, but he was sure that he would be able to weather the backlash even though his image was going to take a hit, and he always wanted to take Dumbledore down by a peg or two, so it wasn't all that bad. I just hope you keep your side of your bargain, Carlson stated while staring at Harry. His voice trembled a bit, and he hated that, but it needed to be said. You don't have to worry about that, Headmaster. I am a man of my word, and you have helped me quite a bit since I came here. I am not going to forget that, Harry assured the man, and he didn't have any plans to betray the man, as having a good relationship with the future president of MCU was a good thing. The man nodded his head in understanding and started to sign the papers after checking them. There you have it. Carlson finished signing the papers and handed them over to Harry. He simply accepted the papers and gave the man a grateful nod. Well, good luck, I guess, the man added as Harry started to stand up. Thank you, Headmaster, Harry said before finally leaving the man's office. After leaving the office, Harry closed his eyes for a bit in concentration as he told Jacqueline and Hymera to meet him outside the school in an hour through their mark before he resumed heading toward his dorms. Time skip, a few hours later. The way you treated Dumbledore and the others was hilarious, Jacqueline blurted out as she started to pat Harry's shoulders while laughing. I am glad that you appreciate, Harry commented dryly. Well, I would have loved to see that too. Hymera sighed, looking somewhat disappointed. She was looking quite different from the way she looked barely 2 months ago. The left side of her face was completely healed, and instead of sporting a fake right eye, her right eye was completely healed. Currently, there was only one scar marring her face. The scar was on her right cheek running down to her chin, and she decided to keep this scar as a trophy of the nightmare she lived through. It was only last week when he healed her eye, and it was the most complex thing he ever healed. I will see if I can find a pensieve, Harry mumbled while rubbing his chin. I don't know what that is, but what now, boss? Hymera asked with an unsure look on her face. Harry quickly gave her a short explanation about what a pensieve was before he finally started to explain why he summoned the two of them here. I have a task for the two of you. Jacqueline, I need you to visit the nearest branch of the guild and post a request for information on who hired the mercenaries to kill me during the Quidditch World Cup in Hymera. I need you to visit Britain and find anything you can about the Gaunt family, Harry revealed, making Hymera nod her head in understanding while Jacqueline inclined her head with a frown. While Hymera wasn't from Britain, she was quite familiar with Wizarding Britain, and there were a lot of people in Nocturne Alley who would happily sell her information in exchange for a bit of gold. Are you sure? I mean, I am quite sure that they are not going to sell me that information, Jacqueline pointed out while frowning. He could have used Hans Muller, but unfortunately, the man didn't survive through his legilimency practice, so Harry decided to feed him to the man-eating slugs around Jacqueline's house. He was sure that the slugs appreciated the treat. I know, but when I start ripping them apart, nobody would be able to say that I didn't ask nicely, Harry pointed out with a feral grin on his face, making Jacqueline nod her head with a similar type of grin on her face. And what about you? Jacqueline asked curiously. I was able to get the headmaster to sign the papers for me, Harry revealed with a grin. Now, he was no longer enrolled in Ilvermorny. I will need to visit the Department of Education to submit my forms and get the dates for my eagles, and after that, I will be making my way into Austria. There is someone I need to meet before making my next move, Harry added with a grin, making both Jacqueline and Hymera raise their eyebrows at him. Chapter 125, Ready Set Action, 3. Harry's apartment, later that evening. Submitting the documents to the Department of Education took a lot more time than he was expecting, and getting the dates for his exams took even more time, but at least, he had the dates. His exams were going to start from the day after tomorrow, and since he had opted for all the subjects except for xylomancy, it was going to take 3 days to finish all of his exams, and then the Department of Education would take 2 weeks to send him his scores. After taking a nice and relaxing shower, he quickly got dressed in a fresh pair of robes. Looking at himself in the mirror, Harry nodded his head in satisfaction. You are looking good as always, my son, Lily praised her son with her grin tugging on her face. By the way, how are you going to Austria? Lily asked curiously. I am going to take my firebolt, Harry answered as he raised his hand in the air and his firebolt came zooming toward him. He grabbed the firebolt with his hand before he started to head toward the fort. Norton, Harry called out, and his dutiful friend arrived with a soft pop. If the Aurors come looking for me, tell them that I never returned from Ilvermorny, Harry directed, and Norton eagerly nodded his head in understanding. And you know what to do if they try to arrest you, don't you? Harry asked with a raised brow, only for Norton to frantically nod his head. Master Hadrian shouldn't worry. Norton best taking care of it, Norton assured Harry, who was already busy removing any traces of his magic. When he was done, he finally started to leave the apartment after giving Norton a nod. After walking out of his apartment building, with disillusionment charm cast on himself, he quickly mounted his broom and blasted off toward Austria. Harry, are you sure that he is going to answer your questions? Lily asked curiously, only for Harry to shrug dismissively. It won't matter if he answers me or not. In the end, I will have my answers, one way or the other, Harry answered firmly, making Lily hum in satisfaction. His appraisal spell has revealed something very juicy during the meeting, and Harry was almost certain that Albus was carrying the Elder Wand. Except for the Elder Wand, he had never seen another wand made of elder wood, and Harry was damn sure that he had seen pictures of Gellert Grindelwald using the same wand during the Wizarding World War. That was exactly why he was heading toward Austria. He wanted to pay a visit to Gellert Grindelwald, who had been imprisoned in the Nurmengard Castle, after the war. Nurmengard Castle was built by Gellert Grindelwald before the Wizarding World War broke out, and he used the castle as his prison to keep his prisoners during the war. Harry wanted to make sure if the wand Dumbledore was carrying around was the legendary Elder Wand or not, and if Dumbledore was carrying the Elder Wand, it meant that it wasn't necessary to kill the last owner of the wand to earn its loyalty. Okay. I will be reading some books. Get me when we are finally there, Lily said before Harry felt her presence disappear into his library. Harry was working extremely hard to improve his fleshcraft, but no matter how much Harry tried, he couldn't create a working heart or a brain for the body. All the other organs and body parts were within his grasp, but no matter how much he tried, the heart and brain kept breaking down within moments. He quickly shook his head to clear his mind. Instead of sulking, he decided to use his beyond genius level intelligence to work on something productive. Guild New York Branch, New York. Jacqueline was impatiently tapping her foot on the floor with an annoyed scowl marring her face. It has been hours since she arrived here, and here she was, still wasting her time in the waiting room for her number to come up. After arriving here, they had given her a token with the number 53 and asked her to wait in the waiting room. The way these guys were handling everything, she was surprised that the guild was still in business. Number 53. A woman on the PA system announced, and Jacqueline shot up from her seat with a growl. "Fucking finally!" Jacqueline exclaimed with a scowl as she started to head toward the exit of the waiting room. After exiting the waiting room, she found herself in front of a counter. The middle-aged woman sitting behind the counter asked her to hand over the token. The woman looked over the token before tapping the table with her wand, and a door appeared on the wall beside her counter. Jacqueline gave her a grateful nod before making her way through the door, and after walking through the door, she found herself inside a normal-looking office with a middle-aged man sitting behind an office desk. His desk was filled with various types of files, not that Jacqueline cared about them. "Welcome to Guild, how may I help you?" the man asked pleasantly as he gestured toward the seat right in front of him, but Jacqueline knew that it was only his business face. He wouldn't think twice before murdering her if it came to that. Jacqueline knew that there was a good chance that Harry would make an enemy out of the guild, not that she particularly cared, but the guild might try to strike her family in retaliation, and that was exactly why Jacqueline had transfigured her face to look like someone else. Jacqueline smiled back at him as she sat down, though instead of being pleasant, her smile was nervous. "I want to buy some information," Jacqueline spoke nervously. It was obviously an act, as she wanted to make them feel that she wasn't sure about what she was doing so that they would underestimate her, but in reality, she knew that there was probably no one in this building who could stop her from leaving if she wanted. The man simply placed his hands on the table, trying to make Jacqueline comfortable. "The payment will depend upon the information you are trying to buy," the man revealed, and Jacqueline gave him a hesitant nod before she started to speak again. "Gold is not an issue," Jacqueline assured, and the man simply gestured her to continue. Jacqueline shuddered before taking a deep breath. During the Quidditch World Cup, someone had hired a group of mercenaries to kill Harry Potter. "I want to know who," Jacqueline stated while fidgeting in her seat. "I will need to check something before confirming your request," the man said, and Jacqueline breathed out unhappily. "All right." Jacqueline agreed with the man, who was already looking through one of his files, but only after a minute. The man frowned and closed the file before placing it back on the table. "I am sorry to inform you, but we won't be able to provide you with that information," the man stated with an apologetic look on his face, and Jacqueline started to stammer nervously. "Why? I am ready to pay you gold. Just give me an amount," Jacqueline blurted out with a desperate look on her face, and the man simply sighed before hatefully glaring at Jacqueline. Jacqueline would have been taken aback by the quick change of personality if she wasn't already expecting that. "We won't be able to provide you with the information. Now please leave, or I would be forced to call security to throw you out, and I promise you, you won't like that," the man warned her as he pulled out his wand. Jacqueline wanted to curse the man into the next weekend so badly, but she decided to hold herself back as Harry had strictly warned her against engaging in combat on her own. "Okay." Jacqueline growled out in anger. She no longer cared that she just blew up her act. She cracked her neck before she turned around on her heel and started to leave the room, and as soon as she was gone, the man behind the desk tapped his desk with his wand and started to speak. "Follow the woman who just walked out of my office and silence her," the man ordered coldly before removing his wand from the desk. He has been working for the guild for more than 2 decades, and he never liked situations like this. The contract was handled by the guild, and the mercenary group who accepted the contract never made it back, so it was pretty easy to guess that they were killed. Now, someone was snooping back the tracks, and this situation was never good for their business. The woman was probably collateral damage, as he did not believe that the real mastermind would come here on his own. It was always bothersome to tie up the loose ends, but it was nothing personal, just business. Meanwhile, Jacqueline walked out of the guild building fuming in anger. They made her wait so long, and she walked out without anything to show for. Jacqueline was not happy. She wasn't happy at all. She was about to place her wand on her mark to inform Harry that the guild acted just the way they expected them to, but she stopped when someone triggered the ward she had placed back around the corner, which meant someone was following her. This was good. If the guild decided to send some stress relievers her way, then who was she to complain?